Get comfortable. Let everything slow. And if you want more nights like this one, subscribe to Midnight Lore. Dark Souls is one of the most carefully constructed fictional universes in gaming. Not because it tells you everything, but because of how precisely it controls what it withholds. Every item description, every piece of enemy armor, every architectural detail is a fragment of a story being told sideways. The more carefully you look, the more you find. Tonight we go underneath the surface. 100 unusual facts about Dark Souls. From the things hidden in plain sight, to the details that change how you understand everything you thought you knew. Fact 1. Gwyn's firstborn son, whose name was erased from all records and whose deific status was stripped, is almost certainly the nameless king encountered in Dark Souls 3, worshipped atop Archdragon Peak. Gwyn had 4 children, Guinevere, Gwyndolin, Filianor, and an unnamed firstborn whose name was deliberately removed from all annals of history. The reason? During the war against the everlasting dragons, Gwyn's firstborn betrayed his father and sided with the dragons. For this, he was stripped of his godhood and expunged from every record. In Dark Souls 3, the nameless king waits atop a forgotten peak at the edge of the world, surrounded by the descendants of dragons, accompanied by a storm drake. He rides into battle. His armor description references the ancient air of sunlight. His soul description references a god of war who tamed the power of storms. The ring of the sun's firstborn, found in Dark Souls and associated with Gwyn's erased firstborn, boosts miracles, consistent with a being who inherited divine power before losing the title that came with it. He is one of the most powerful optional bosses in Dark Souls 3. He has been waiting at the edge of the world for longer than most of the game's other characters have existed. The dragons he chose over his father's kingdom. He has been living among them ever since, stripped of a name, stripped of godhood still there. Fact 2. Gwyn's boss theme in the original Dark Souls uses only white piano keys. No black keys. Only the white notes of the scale, played with increasing desperation as the fight progresses. The musical choice is deliberate and deeply appropriate. Gwyn is the Lord of Sunlight, the god of fire and light, the being who maintained the Age of Fire through his own sacrifice. White keys, pure light, but played in a pattern that is sorrowful rather than triumphant, that builds with the specific rhythm of something that has been burning for a very long time and is running out of fuel. When you parry Gwyn, when you interrupt his attacks with the specific timing that the game rewards, he staggers like a confused, weakened old man rather than a god. His moveset for the final boss of Dark Souls is remarkably simple. This is intentional. Gwyn burned away everything he was to link the first flame. What you fight is the hollow remnant of the Lord of Sunlight, his mind gone, and his body still following the patterns of the warrior he once was. The music plays on, only the white notes, getting quieter. Fact 3. Seath the Scaleless, the albino dragon who betrayed his own kind to ally with Gwyn, was the only dragon who did not possess the stone scales that made the everlasting dragons immortal. This is why he betrayed them, and why immortality became his obsession. Every everlasting dragon possessed stone scales, the specific physical property that made them resistant to damage, resistant to aging, resistant to the passage of time. Seath was born without them. In a civilization of immortal beings, he was the one who was not. His betrayal of the dragons to Gwyn was not simply opportunistic treachery. It was the act of a being who genuinely had more in common with the mortals who could be killed than with the immortal beings he lived among. He gave Gwyn the knowledge needed to strip the dragons of their scales, making them vulnerable, making them killable, and was rewarded with a dukedom, a fragment of Gwyn's Lord Soul, and an archive to conduct his research. What Seath spent that research on? Immortality. He stole the primordial crystal from the dragons he had betrayed. A crystal whose properties granted near-complete invulnerability, and installed it in his archive as the center of his ongoing study. He was not simply pursuing knowledge. He was pursuing the specific thing he had never had. The quality that would have made him like the other dragons. The quality he had helped destroy in order to survive. He eventually went mad. The research that could have given him what he wanted exceeded what his mind could hold. He is both the father of sorcery in Lordran. His work inspired the Dragon School of Vinheim, and a being who destroyed himself in the pursuit of the one thing he could never stop wanting. Fact 4. The furtive pygmy, the fourth Lord Soulholder, the ancestor of all humanity, is mentioned in the opening cinematic and then never spoken of again in the main game. Gwyn feared the Dark Soul so much that he had all records of the pygmy removed from history. 4 beings found Lord Souls in the First Flame: Gwyn, Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and the furtive pygmy. The pygmy's soul was unique, the Dark Soul, which granted dominion over all other souls and carried the specific potential to end the Age of Fire and begin the Age of Dark. Gwyn recognized the threat. He had the pygmy erased from history. The same damnatio memoriae he applied to his own firstborn, but for different reasons. The firstborn was erased for betrayal. The pygmy was erased out of fear of what the Dark Soul represented. The Undead Curse, the dark sign that marks the player character and every undead in Lordran, is, in some readings, Gwyn's response to the Dark Soul's potential. Humanity carries fragments of the Dark Soul. If those fragments were gathered, if the Dark Soul were reconstituted, the Age of Dark would begin, and Gwyn's civilization would end. The dark sign is the mark of those who carry these fragments. The undead asylums are where Gwyn corralled the people who frightened him. The player character is a descendant of the furtive pygmy. They carry a fragment of the Dark Soul. The entire game is the consequence of Gwyn's fear of one being he chose to erase. Fact 5. Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, administers the death of all living things in Lordran, and has done so since before the Age of Fire. Nito is one of the stranger figures in Dark Souls lore because his function is described with bureaucratic matter-of-factness. He administers death, not as a villain, not as a monster, as a function. The concept of living things dying requires a governing principle, and Nito is that principle given form. His appearance, a skeletal mass of bodies fused together, wearing burial robes, is the physical expression of everything that has ever died in Lordran, accumulating around the entity that represents the concept of death itself. He lives in the tomb of the giants, the deepest and darkest place in Lordran. He has a covenant of Gravelord servants who spread death across the world in his name. His Lord Soul, the soul of life and death, was powerful enough to kill dragons during the war. He released a miasma of disease and decay so complete that it could strip away the immortality the dragon scales had provided. The god of death's specific power was not fire or lightning, but entropy, the specific force that undoes every form of protection that existence has built against its own ending. When you fight him, his tomb is filled with sleeping giants who wake if they hear combat. He is protected by the accumulated dead. He does not come to you. He waits in the darkness that everything eventually reaches. Fact 6. The Witch of Izalith tried to create a second first flame using her own Lord Soul. And the catastrophic failure of this attempt produced every chaos demon and bed of chaos in the game. As the Age of Fire began to fade, Gwyn sought a way to sustain it. The Witch of Izalith attempted to recreate the first flame from her Lord Soul of Life, to build a new source of fire that would maintain the age indefinitely. The ritual failed. The flame she produced was not the first flame, but a twisted chaos flame, and it consumed her. What emerged from the failure? The bed of chaos, mother of all demons, which still exists deep in the ruins of Izalith. The witch herself is inside the bed of chaos, still present, still alive in some sense, but fused with the chaotic fire she tried to control. Her daughters, the daughters of chaos, survived the transformation in varying states. Some became the chaos witches who trade in pyromancy. Quelaag and her sister managed to retain their upper bodies, while their lower halves fused with spider-like chaos forms. The Iron Keep, Demon Ruins, and Lost Izalith are the ruins of what the Witch of Izalith built before her experiment destroyed it. Every chaos demon in the game descends from the failed fire. The Bed of Chaos is the boss fight that represents the mother of all demon kind. And fighting it, the game gives you one of its most sobering lore revelations. The thing you are destroying was once the god who tried to save the Age of Fire and failed. Fact 7, Smaug, the executioner who guards Anor Londo alongside Ornstein, was denied the rank of Knight of Gwyn specifically because of his cannibalism. He aspired to be one of Gwyn's 4 great knights. He was rejected. The 4 Knights of Gwyn are among the most powerful warriors in Lordran's history. Ornstein the Dragon Slayer, Artorias the Abyss Walker, Kieran the Lord's Blade, and Gulf the Hawk. Smaug wanted to be the 5th, or wanted to replace one of them. His fighting ability was presumably sufficient. He is, as the player discovers, extremely difficult to kill. His rejection came specifically from his habit of eating those he executed. The executioner who cannot stop eating the executed is, apparently, a specific violation of whatever ethics Gwyn's court maintained. He ground the flesh of his victims into his cooking and consumed them. When Anor Londo was abandoned, when the gods left and the illusion of a functioning city remained, Smaug stayed. The item description for Smaug's armor notes that he relished his title and remained to the end. He wasn't loyal in any meaningful sense to Gwyn or the gods who left. He was loyal to Anor Londo itself, to the city and the role he occupied within it. He guarded the princess's chamber long after the princess had gone, in company with the illusion of a knight who had also left. What keeps a rejected man in a ruined city? The specific dignity of having a post to defend, even after the purpose of the post has dissolved. Fact 8. Artorias the Abyss Walker, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, celebrated as the hero who entered the Abyss, actually failed in his mission. He could not survive the Abyss. He sacrificed himself to protect his wolf companion Seath, using his own life to shield her from the darkness. The legend of Artorias in Lordran is one of heroism. The knight who entered the Abyss and walked among the darkness without being corrupted. Paintings and references throughout the game treat him as a paragon of the Abyss Walker Covenant. When you find him in the DLC in the past, he is corrupted, powerful, broken, his arm shattered, his will subsumed by the very darkness he came to fight. What happened? Artorias descended into Oolacile to fight the Abyss. He found Seath there. He recognized that he could not protect both of them from the Abyss and made a choice. Used his great shield and his body to create a protected space for Seath to survive in, allowing the Abyss to claim him in the process. The legend of Artorias that persists in Lordran is not the truth of what happened. The truth is that he sacrificed himself and failed in his actual mission. You, traveling back in time, complete what Artorias could not. You fight the Abyss. You save what was left to save. And by the time you return to the present, Artorias' legend is intact because no one who remembered the truth survived long enough to correct it. Seath, in the present, guards his grave. She fights you when you approach, not because she is corrupted or evil, but because she is protecting the grave of the knight who protected her. And when her health drops low, she begins to limp. She fights on. Fact 9. Gwendolyn, Gwyn's youngest son, was raised as a daughter because of his affinity for the moon and sorcery, which were considered feminine qualities in Gwyn's culture. Gwendolyn inherited power associated with the moon rather than the sun, the lunar light that was considered the domain of a feminine divine presence rather than the solar authority that was masculine in Lordran's theological framework. Gwyn chose to raise him accordingly, dressed in the manner of Gwyn's daughters, trained in the lunar arts, presented to the world as the daughter he was being raised as. Gwendolyn's appearance, the elaborate ceremonial robes, the snakes that trail from his lower body rather than legs, reflects this upbringing. His power over illusions, over the projection of a maintained fiction, is both his most significant magical ability and the specific metaphor of his existence. A figure who maintains the appearance of a functioning Anor Londo after the reality has been abandoned. When you enter Anor Londo, the city appears populated, sunlit, and functional. The warmth in the sky above Anor Londo is Gwendolyn's illusion. The Guinevere you meet, the Princess of Sunlight, enormous and radiant, is an illusion Gwendolyn projects. When you attack Guinevere, the illusion dissolves. The full sunlight in Anor Londo goes dark, and you understand that the youngest of Gwyn's children has been maintaining the appearance of a living city around a palace that the gods abandoned long ago. He stayed. He kept the lights on. He watched over the memory of what Anor Londo had been, alone, with illusions. Fact 10. Anor Londo, the city of the gods, the grand destination of the second half of Dark Souls, is almost entirely empty when you arrive. Every divine being you encounter there except Gwendolyn is either an illusion, long gone, or one of the few devotees who stayed with the city after the gods left. The Silver Knights who patrol the cathedral are the ones who remained, who did not accompany Gwyn to the kiln of the first flame, and were not among those who fled. The gargoyles on the rooftops are not gods. They are guardians maintaining their posts by instinct or residual purpose. The only genuine presence in Anor Londo's upper reaches is Gwyndolin, in his chamber, and the illusion of the princess he projects to give visitors something to find. The scale of Anor Londo, the enormous architecture, the vast cathedral, the sense of a city built for beings of divine proportion, was built for a civilization that was already leaving when the game begins. The grandiosity of what you walk through is the grandiosity of something that peaked and then faded, maintaining the form of divine purpose after the purpose itself had moved elsewhere. This is one of Dark Souls' quietest horror effects. The revelation that the most impressive city in the game is impressive specifically because of what it no longer contains. Fact 11. The Black Knights, the enemies patrolling the kiln of the first flame and scattered throughout Lordran, are what remains of the knights who accompanied Gwyn when he linked the fire. They were burned by the chaos flame in the kiln and became the hollow, charred warriors you encounter. Gwyn divided his knights before departing. Half stayed in Anor Londo to protect the city and fight the chaos demons that the Witch of Izalith's failed experiment was producing. The other half went with him to the kiln of the first flame. In the kiln, the chaos flame burned them, not destroyed them, but changed them. The specific quality of chaos fire is different from ordinary fire. It twists rather than simply consuming. The knights who accompanied Gwyn became the Black Knights, enormous, powerfully armored, aggressive without purpose, patrolling the areas they were assigned to patrol long after the reason for the assignment has dissolved. They cannot be killed permanently in their home areas. They respawn. They have been doing this alone in the dark for the entirety of the Age of Fire's decline. When you encounter a Black Knight in Lordran, you are encountering someone who followed their lord to his sacrifice and was changed by the proximity to divine fire into something that can no longer die in the conventional sense, still doing the last thing they were ordered to do. Fact 12. Havel the Rock, the enormous armoured enemy locked in the tower basement near Darkroot Garden, was imprisoned by his close friend Gwyn. They were allies, not enemies. Gwyn locked him away. Havel was a general under Gwyn's command, one of the most physically powerful figures in the game's history, whose armor made him nearly impervious to damage and whose weight made him move like a force of nature. He was Gwyn's friend and his most formidable warrior. What happened between them? Havel became obsessed with the occult, the specific branch of power that the game establishes as being the bane of lords, a force capable of harming beings with divine power. His pursuit of occult knowledge put him in conflict with Gwyn's theology. He ultimately assaulted the gods directly, attempting to challenge divine authority through the power he had been accumulating. He was not strong enough. He was captured. Gwyn locked him in the tower, and the key was given to the serpent Kingseeker Frampt, who would have no reason to ever release him. When you find Havel in the basement of the tower, he is hollow, his mind gone, his body still wearing the armor, still fighting anyone who comes near. What made him dangerous enough to imprison rather than execute was the same quality that now makes him a significant combat encounter: that armor, that strength, that specific refusal to stop. Fact 13. The 4 kings of New Londo. The bosses fought in the flooded ruins at the bottom of Firelink Shrine. Were once the legitimate rulers of a functioning city. Gwyn gave them fragments of his Lord Soul in recognition of their wisdom and leadership. They were considered among the greatest leaders of the Age of Fire. New Londo was not always flooded. It was a city of the undead, built specifically to house those who bore the dark sign, a place where they could be ruled and governed rather than simply imprisoned. The 4 kings governed it well enough that Gwyn considered their leadership worthy of a piece of divine power. What undid them? Darkstalker Carthy, the primordial serpent who sought the Age of Dark, the counterpart and ideological opponent of Kingseeker Frompt, found his way to New Londo and taught the 4 kings the art of life drain, the ability to steal the very souls of other beings through touch. The 4 kings and their knights became the Dark Wraiths, and their city became a place of the specific horror that life drain produces. The sealers of New Londo flooded the city, drowning the Dark Wraiths and the 4 kings together, sealing them in the water, to prevent the life drain from spreading to the surface. They drowned an entire city to contain what one primordial serpent's teachings had produced. The 4 kings have been in the abyss beneath the flooded ruins ever since. When you drain the water to reach them, you are undoing the containment that the sealers gave their lives to maintain. Whether this is necessary, whether there was another way, is not something the game addresses. You need the Lord's Soul. The sealers are dead. The flood is the only thing between the surface and the abyss. Fact 14. Solaire of Astora, perhaps the most beloved NPC in all of Dark Souls, has a questline with 2 endings, and the good ending requires the player to find and kill a specific parasite in Lost Izalith before Solaire does. Most players never discover this on their first playthrough. Solaire came to Lordran in search of his own sun, his own light, his own meaning, some divine warmth that he could claim as his. His cheerful invocations of sunlight, his warmth toward the chosen undead, his willingness to appear as a golden phantom and fight alongside you through some of the game's hardest encounters. All of it is the expression of a man who has found purpose in seeking something he cannot yet name. If you do not find the sunlight maggot in Lost Izalith and kill it before Solaire reaches that area, he will find the glowing parasite himself. He will put it on his head. The creature will drive him mad, its light mimicking the sun he has been searching for, its parasitic nature consuming the mind of the man who was vulnerable to exactly this specific corruption. If you have opened the shortcut in Lost Izalith, accessible only by reaching rank 1 in the Chaos Servant Covenant, requiring 30 humanity, you can reach the maggot before Solaire does and kill it. Solaire, who has not found the full sun, will eventually find his way out of his despair and meet you before the final boss. He will offer his golden phantom to help you fight Gwyn. 2 endings. One requires the most specific, least explained set of prerequisite actions in the game. Most players see Solaire go mad and understand, on some level, that they missed something important. The game does not tell you what. Fact 15. Siegmeyer of Katarina, the Jolly Onion Knight who seems to be in trouble everywhere you find him, came to Lordran specifically to die in battle. He has the Undead Curse. He knows he is hollowing. He wanted his final adventure to be a good one. This is revealed only by meeting his daughter Sieglinde, who followed him to Lordran out of concern. She explains what Siegmeyer never says directly. He is on his last journey, and he knew it when he began. The characteristic optimism, the cheerful willingness to wait for problems to solve themselves, the specific pleasure he takes in every small victory. All of it reads differently when you understand that he came here to find a worthy end, not a triumph. The irony that defines his quest line. If you help him too much, you rob him of the death he was seeking. Every time you clear the path ahead of him, every time you defeat the enemies he was planning to face, you deny him the heroic end he came for. Help him enough and he will eventually reach Ash Lake, looking for a dragon to die fighting. The dragon there, the everlasting dragon, who has been sleeping in the water for ages, is docile. It does not fight. Siegmeyer, having run out of worthy deaths, and having had every challenge resolved by someone more capable than himself, loses hope and hollows. His daughter kills him. The game gives you this tragedy as the reward for being helpful. You were supposed to let him fight. Fact 16. Lortrek of Karim, the knight you free from his cell in the Undead Parish, is devoted to a goddess named Fina, who may not exist in any conventional sense. His entire personality and his eventual betrayal emerge from this devotion. Lortrek wears gold armor. He is visually striking and initially cooperative. He will give you a sunlight medal if you free him, will appear at Firelink Shrine, offering observations about the world, and can even be summoned to help fight certain bosses. He will also murder Anastasia, the firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, in cold blood. Not out of malice in any personal sense, but because killing a firekeeper releases her soul and makes it available. And Lortrek intends to offer it to his goddess. Goddess Fina, whose favor Lortrek has been seeking across the entire game, who is described as a being of eternal love, who exists in a state of formlessness, so formless, so undefined, that scholars question whether she exists at all. He is devoted to an absence. His devotion to this absence is the most real thing about him. When he kills Anastasia, he is not being gratuitously cruel. He is performing a religious act for a being who may not be there to receive it, with a sincerity that the game does not mock. His armor in Anno Londo, which he wears over his devotion like a second set of robes, is the gold of sunlight and divinity. He wears the appearance of a god's favor while serving a goddess who is defined by her absence. Fact 17. Artorias fights with his right hand in the boss fight because his left arm, his dominant arm, was shattered in the fight against Manus, father of the Abyss, the boss you fight at half his normal capacity. The Artorias you encounter in the DLC in the past has already fought Manus and lost in the way that mattered most. He preserved Seath, but was consumed by the Abyss in the process. By the time you reach him, his left arm is broken beyond function. He still fights with his right hand, still wields his greatsword, still applies the specific power that makes him one of the most technically impressive boss fights in the game. He is doing all of this at half capacity. The Artorias who is now fighting you, corrupted by the Abyss and no longer the warrior he was, is still capable of this level of combat with his non-dominant hand, arm broken, mind compromised. What he must have been at full power, before the abyss, before the sacrifice, and before Manus broke him, is suggested but never directly shown. The lore does not explicitly state that his left arm is broken. This is information assembled by the community from the way he fights, the way he guards, and the item descriptions that reference his shattered left arm. The game tells you this with his body language rather than his dialogue. You have to be paying attention. Fact 18. Petrus of Thorolund, the cleric who appears at Firelink Shrine as part of Rhea's travelling group, likely abandoned Rhea and her companions in the Tomb of the Giants deliberately, leaving them to die, and then returned to Firelink Shrine to wait. Rhea of Thorolund travels to Lordran with 2 companions and Petrus as her guard. When you find her in the Tomb of the Giants, she is alone. Her companions have hollowed and become enemies. Our Petrus has already returned to Firelink Shrine. His story, assembled from item descriptions and the observations of other NPCs, suggests he abandoned the group. The Thorolund Church sends missions into Lordran, and the politics of these missions involve who survives and who inherits the religious authority. Rhea's survival and success would have implications for Petrus's standing in the church. Rhea's death would be unfortunate but convenient. If Rhea survives and makes it to Firelink Shrine, she eventually goes to the Duke's archives and becomes a hollow. A tragic end that Petrus may have calculated on. He sells her miracles after she disappears, as though her techniques have simply become available. Even Patches, the unscrupulous treasure hunter who pushes clerics into pits, calls Petrus scum. This is notable because Patches is not a moral authority. He is specifically noting that even by his standards, Petrus's behavior is objectionable. Fact 19. Patches the hyena appears in Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne and Elden Ring. Always as a treasure hunter who will betray you at least once and then attempt to bribe his way back into your good graces. He is possibly the same person across all these games, which span thousands of years. In Dark Souls, he is in the catacombs and will kick you into a pit if you enter a specific chamber while he is present. In Bloodborne, he is a hunter with a very similar personality, hat and set of behaviors. In Elden Ring, he is there again and selling wares and running the specific scam of seeming helpful until he isn't. Whether this is the same Patches traversing time and worlds, or whether Patches is simply a recurring character type, the specific shape that certain kinds of untrustworthy opportunists take across different settings, is a question the games maintain without answering. Miyazaki has confirmed that Patches is always Patches, always the same character, which suggests something is happening across these timelines that the games do not explain. He is, in every game he appears in, simultaneously the most untrustworthy and most consistently present figure. He will always betray you. He will always survive. He will always be doing business when the world ends. Kahem. Fact 20. Crossbreed. Priscilla, the optional boss in the painted world of Ariamis, does not want to fight you. She asks you to leave. If you do, you can walk out of the painted world without killing her, and the encounter ends peacefully. The painted world of Ariamis is a location that the game makes it very difficult to leave without fighting Priscilla. The exit requires going through her chamber. Priscilla is enormous. half dragon, half something else, wielding a scythe that inflicts the life hunt effect. And the room is designed to look like a boss arena. She asks you to leave. Specifically and explicitly, she says you are an undead who arrived here by mistake, and that it would be better for you to go without fighting. If you turn around and walk back out of the room, she does not attack. The encounter ends. You are not rewarded with a boss soul, because you did not fight a boss. Most players kill her. The room looks like a boss fight. The character looks like a boss. The game's conditioning, established across dozens of obligatory boss fights, makes the optional peaceful resolution feel wrong. Feels like the player might be missing something, should be fighting, cannot simply walk away from something this impressive. Priscilla has been in the painted world for an extremely long time, keeping the place peaceful and the infected hollows within it contained. She is not there to fight you. She is there to protect everyone outside the painting from what is inside it. The players who leave without fighting see her thank them softly. Most players never hear those words. As from Fact 21, the Undead Asylum, where the game begins, is not simply a prison. It is a facility built specifically to contain the undead while waiting for the prophesied chosen undead to escape and link the fire. The asylum was Gwyn's design to manage the undead problem without having to deal with the implications of what the undead were. The dark sign marks those who carry fragments of the dark soul. Gwyn feared what the accumulated dark sign bearers could mean. The reconstitution of the dark soul and the beginning of the Age of Dark. His response was the Undead Asylum, a place to gather those who could not die, contain them, and wait. The prophecy that the crestfallen warrior recites to you when you arrive at Fireling's shrine, that an undead would be chosen, escape the asylum, and succeed Gwyn in linking the fire, was spread through Kingseeker Frampt, whose agenda is to perpetuate the Age of Fire. The prophecy is, in a meaningful sense, not a divine revelation, but a recruitment strategy, the promise of meaningful destiny given to beings who would otherwise have no reason to cooperate with Gwyn's priorities. This means the chosen undead's entire journey, everything you do to reach Gwyn and link the first flame, is a mission designed by forces with specific interests in the outcome. Whether those interests align with yours, or with humanity's, or with the natural course of the world, is the question both endings invite you to sit with. Fact 22. Oscar, our Knight of Astora, the undead who gives the player the Estus flask and dies in the opening of the game, had extensive dialogue that was removed before release. If it had been included, he would have been a major companion character. Oscar is dead the second time you meet him. The game gives you almost nothing about who he was beyond the brief exchange in the asylum cell. He tells you the prophecy, gives you the flask, and is gone when you return to the cell. The game files contain nearly 30 minutes of recorded dialogue for Oscar. Conversations about his past, his motivations, his understanding of the world, his relationship to the prophecy, his thoughts about the other undead he had encountered. He was originally designed to parallel the chosen undead, to go on a journey similar to yours, to reach some of the same places, and to make different choices. This parallel was removed because Miyazaki felt it was too direct. that the player's identification with their own protagonist was better served by Oscar being a brief, dying presence whose story had to be imagined, rather than a companion whose story competed with theirs. The dialogue exists. Oscar's full story exists. It has never been officially released, but it exists in the files of the game. A ghost of a different version of Dark Souls, where the knight who gave you the Estus flask was still there at the end. Fact 23. The Painting Guardian enemies who protect the painted world of Ariamis are the women who created and maintained the painting. They have devoted their lives to the specific task of keeping the painting intact and its world protected. And the painted world is a specific kind of magic, a created realm inside an artwork, sealed from the outside world, used to contain what needed to be contained away from Lordran. The women who are the painting guardians chose this devotion willingly, to protect the painting, to maintain its integrity, and to attack anyone who entered the painting world and might disturb what was preserved within it. Their curved swords are among the fastest weapons in the game, scaled for dexterity and designed for opponents who are entering a space that was never meant to be entered. They are not enemies in the same sense as hollows or demons. They are guardians with a specific purpose, fulfilling it with the precision and dedication of people who made it their life's work. When you fight them, you are fighting the women who have kept Priscilla's world from being disturbed for however long the painting has existed. Their skill, their speed, their coordination, their specific mastery of the curved blade is the skill of people who have been doing one thing and doing it very well for a very long time. Fact 24. Big Hat Logan, the sorcerer you free from multiple cages throughout the game, eventually goes mad, studying Seath's work in the Duke's archives and transforms himself into the same kind of crystal creature as Seath's victims. Logan is one of the most respected sorcerers in Lordran when you first encounter him. He came to Lordran to study at the Duke's archives, Seath's personal library of magical research, which contains the most advanced sorcery in the world. His academic ambitions are presented as legitimate, and his gratitude for being freed from his first cage is genuine. He does not stop. Each time you find him, he is further along in his study of Seath's research, and each step takes him further from himself. He discovers the White Dragon Breath spell, one of the most powerful sorceries in the game, replicating Seath's crystal exhalation. He claims to have seen what Seath saw. He becomes increasingly disconnected from ordinary conversation. When you finally reach him in the archives, he is fully mad, transformed by his study of immortality-adjacent magic into a pale, crystal-touched version of himself, hollow in a specific way that is the product of too much knowledge rather than too little purpose. He drops the most powerful sorceries when defeated. He was trying to understand what Seath understood. He found out. The finding out is what broke him, as it broke Seath, as it breaks every mind that gets close enough to the specific truths the Duke's archives contain. Fact 25. Kingseeker Frampt and Darkstalker Carter, the two primordial serpents, are presenting the chosen undead with opposing versions of the same fundamental choice, and both of them are manipulating you toward their preferred outcome. Frampt wants the Age of Fire to continue. He presents the linking of the first flame as the fulfillment of divine prophecy, the correct and noble choice. the thing the chosen undead was meant to do. He has been sleeping near Firelink Shrine, waiting for someone to send on this mission. Karthi wants the Age of Dark to begin. He appears in the Abyss after the four kings are defeated and presents the Dark Lord ending as the chosen undead's true destiny, to bring about the Age of Humanity, the era that the Dark Soul was always meant to produce. Both of them are snakes. This is not metaphorical. They are massive, eyeless serpents with flat teeth who speak with elaborate courtesy. The game calls them imperfect dragons in some readings, beings who aspired to be dragons but produced a different, stranger form. Their elaborate philosophies about fire and dark may be genuine theological positions, or may be elaborate manipulations designed to produce outcomes that benefit them specifically. Whichever ending you choose, one of them is wrong. The game does not tell you which one. Possibly neither of them is right in the complete way they present themselves to be. Shart, Fact 26. The chosen undead is not unique. There have been others before you, and the game shows you what happened to some of them. They are the hollow enemies you fight throughout Lordran. The dark sign drives undead to Lordran in pursuit of the prophecy. Many come. Most go hollow before they can accomplish anything significant. The hollow enemies in the Undead Burg, the Undead Parish, throughout Lordran, wearing armor in varying states of quality, wielding weapons in varying states of repair, were people who came here for the same reason you did, who lost their minds before they could reach what they were looking for. The crestfallen warrior at Firelink Shrine represents the specific despair of someone who understood this and could not find the will to continue anyway. He knows how many have come. He knows the odds. He sits at the bonfire and tells you the situation with the specific flatness of a person who no longer believes the information he is sharing has any practical value. When you kill hollow enemies, you are fighting the failures of all the previous attempts at what you are trying to do. The specific tragedy is that they are recognizable as people. They fight with weapons, they wear armor, they have the patterns of trained warriors, even in the state they have reached. You are not the first chosen undead. You are the one who did not hollow before the end. Fact 27. Quelaag kills humans and undead who come to Blighttown not out of malice, but because she is collecting humanity to cure her sister. She is the boss of Blighttown. She is also, in her specific context, trying to save the one person left she loves. The fair lady, Quelaag's sister, found in the hidden chamber behind a breakable wall below the second bell, is blind, sick, immobilized, absorbing the blight disease of every follower who comes to her in an attempt to ease their suffering at the cost of her own. She cannot cure herself. She cannot move. Quelaag has been killing anyone who comes close to the area and taking their humanity to bring back to her sister. Not to feed on, but to give, hoping that accumulated humanity will eventually be enough to restore what the Chaos Flame took from the fair lady. When you kill Quelaag and arrive in the fair lady's chamber carrying her sister's soul, the fair lady thinks you are Quelaag. She cannot see. She mistakes the person holding her dead sister's soul for the sister herself. She thanks you for coming back. She asks if you have brought more humanity. She talks about holding on a little longer, If you kill her, if you attack the blind, sick, immobilized woman who has mistaken her sister's killer for her sister, her dying words are, "Sister." Why? She thinks Quelaag decided to kill her, that the person who had been protecting her finally gave up. Fact 28. Ceaseless Discharge. The enormous lava demon encountered at the entrance to the demon ruins is the son of the Witch of Izalith, transformed by the Chaos Flame. He does not attack you until you take an item from a nearby corpse. That corpse is one of his sisters. The mechanics of the Ceaseless Discharge encounter are unusual. You enter the arena and nothing happens. He hangs from the cliff above, visible but dormant. Only when you move to loot the body on the ground, which turns out to be one of the Daughters of Chaos, killed by the Chaos Fire, does he attack. He is not guarding a treasure, he is guarding a grave. The Daughters of Chaos who died in their mother's catastrophe are still there, still recognizable, and the transformed son, who has been standing in the heat of the demon ruins, is standing watch over what remains of his sisters. His name, Ceaseless Discharge, refers to the lava that constantly flows from his body, the specific physical consequence of being the first demon, the first being produced by the Chaos Flame's transformation of an ordinary person. The Witch of Izalith's youngest son became the monster that defines the entrance to her ruined city, still performing the only act of devotion his transformed body can express, standing over the dead and making sure no one disturbs them. You take the item, he attacks. The game never tells you what you just did. Fact 29. Quelaag, the only daughter of Chaos who escaped the Chaos Flame without physical mutation, has been hiding in the swamp of Blighttown for centuries, watching her sisters suffer and doing nothing, out of guilt for having survived. Quelaag is the pyromancy trainer of Blighttown, a woman standing in the toxic swamp who requires a sufficiently developed pyromancy flame to even become visible to the player. She was the Witch of Izalith's most skilled student. When the Chaos experiment failed, she ran. She is the only daughter who escaped unharmed. Her dialogue is specific about what her survival cost her. She describes abandoning her mother and sisters, fleeing while they burned, watching from a distance as they were transformed into demons and the bed of chaos. She has been in the swamp, close enough to be near what remains of them, far enough to be separate from it, ever since. She eventually asks you to do what she cannot bring herself to do. End her mother's suffering. Destroy the bed of chaos. Free what remains of the Witch of Izalith from the specific torment of existing as a monstrous anchor for the chaos flame. When you do it, when you fight the bed of chaos and end it, Quelaag is gone when you return, as she disappears after her request is fulfilled. She never says goodbye. The game does not give you a moment of closure. She is simply not there anymore, which may be the most honest thing the game could offer a character whose entire existence has been organized around an absence she could not resolve. Fact 30. Manus, Father of the Abyss. The final boss of the Artorias of the Abyss, DLC, was once an ordinary human. He was dead. The people of Oolacile were persuaded to dig up his grave and disturb his remains, which caused his accumulated humanity to go wild and produce the Abyss. The Abyss is not an ancient evil from before the Age of Fire. It is something that happened during the Age of Fire, produced by a specific act. The disturbing of a primeval human's remains. Manus was one of the earliest humans, possibly one of the Pygmies' direct descendants, whose dark soul had accumulated into something extraordinarily powerful. He was buried. He was at rest. A primordial serpent, one of the snake-like entities who appear throughout the game offering philosophical guidance with their own agendas, persuaded the people of Oolacile to dig up his grave. The text is careful not to specify which serpent, but the implication points strongly toward Kati, whose interest in the Age of Dark makes the deliberate triggering of an Abyss event ideologically coherent. When Manus's remains were disturbed, his latent humanity woke and spread, not as the warm, vital force that humanity represents in the game's larger philosophy, but as wild, uncontrolled dark that consumed everything it touched. And Oolacile's population was transformed. The city fell. Manus, now conscious, but no longer human in any functional sense, became the father of the Abyss. He drops a ring in the boss fight. Inside the ring, if you look at its item description, it suggests he was searching for something even as he raged, something he had lost, something from before the burial. The lore community's reading, he was looking for the pendant, a lost thing from a time before everything went wrong. Fact 31. The people of Oolacile, who were transformed by the Abyss and appear as bloatheads and other enemies in the DLC, are recognizable underneath their corruption as the same kind of humans you encounter throughout Lordran. They did not become monsters. They became what humans look like when their humanity expands beyond the limits that human form can contain. The item descriptions in the DLC describe Oolacile's population before Manus, an ancient human civilization of sorcerers, people who worked with light and illusion magic, who lived in what would eventually become the Darkroot Garden. The relationship between the Darkroot Garden and the ruins of Oolacile is visible in the architecture. The same roots, the same stones, the same general structure, separated by the ages between the DLC's time period and the present. The bloathead enemies, swollen, deformed, aggressive, were these people. What the Abyss did to them was not possession or replacement. It was expansion, their humanity, the warm, vital fragment of the dark soul that every human carries, grew beyond its containment and changed them into something that could no longer function as a human community. This is the most disturbing thing about the Abyss. It does not destroy what it transforms. It amplifies it. The horror of Oolacile is not that something external invaded its people. It is that something internal got too large for them. Fact 32. Siegth, the great grey wolf, can be summoned into the boss fight against Manus in the DLC. And if you freed Siegth from Artorias' protective ward before the fight, the post-fight cutscene shows Siegth recognizing you in the present-day battle and hesitating before attacking. In the DLC, you travel to the past. You find Siegth trapped in a magical ward that Artorias created with his last act of will. The specific space he preserved using his broken body and his remaining power to keep his companion safe while the Abyss consumed him. You free Siegth. She can then be summoned to help you fight Manus. If you successfully bring her through the fight, something interesting happens in the main game when you eventually approach Artorias' grave. Siegth recognizes you. She has been waiting at her master's grave for centuries, since the events of the DLC. She knows she has to stop you from obtaining the ring needed to enter the abyss, but she recognizes the person she has to stop. She hesitates. Her animations change. She pauses before beginning the fight, and when her health gets low, she begins to limp, still fighting, but clearly damaged in a way that makes each step visible. The game does not give Sif dialogue. She cannot explain what she is feeling. The recognition, the hesitation, and the limping. These are everything she has to communicate the tragedy of fighting someone she remembers from a time when they were both on the same side. Fact 33. Kieran, Lord's Blade, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, was in love with Artorias. When you give her Artorias' soul after the boss fight, she takes it, goes to his grave, and weeps. Kieran is the assassination specialist of Gwyn's 4 great knights, the blade that moved unseen, the killer who operated in darkness rather than the sunlit battlefield where Ornstein and Guff and Artorias fought. Her weapons, the gold and dark silver tracers, are unique to her specific fighting style. She appears in the DLC, seeking what you find at the end of it. Artorias' soul. She asks for it. The item descriptions for her equipment describe the specific relationship between them. The devotion she carried for the knight who walked into the abyss and did not come back as himself. When you give her the soul, she takes it and goes to the gravesite. She stays there. She does not fight you. She asks to be left alone and kneels at the grave, performing what the game implies is a ritual of mourning. Her specific way of sending him off properly, now that the soul she could retrieve is in her hands. She is still there when you check later. She is not going anywhere. Everything she came for is accounted for, and there is nowhere else that matters. Fact 34. The Undead Parish Church, where the Bell Gargoyles are fought, contains a channeler in an early room who is summoning the hollow undead enemies in the area. He is there specifically because Seath sent him to harvest humanity, which Seath needs for his immortality research. The channeler enemies throughout Lordran, the humanoid figures with their distinctive spin attack, and the ability to buff nearby enemies, are agents of Seath deployed to gather humanity from the undead population. The presence of a channeler in the early areas of the game is not simply a difficulty adjustment. It is a specific lore detail. Seath's research requires humanity, and his channelers travel throughout Lordran to acquire it. The hollow undead near the channeler in the parish are behaving differently from hollows in other areas. They are being actively fed by his presence, their aggression amplified by his specific magical influence. The channeler is not simply an enemy. He is a researcher's assistant, undoing collection work in a location that happens to be on the player's path. If you kill the channeler, the hollows in his area calm down significantly. The game presents this as a gameplay reward. The lore implication is that you have disrupted an active Seath operation, which is happening throughout Lordran at multiple points, and which you may or may not be aware of depending on how carefully you read item descriptions. Fact 35. The painted world of Artorias was created as a refuge, a place to safely contain things that were too dangerous to exist freely in Lordran, and too valuable to simply destroy. Priscilla herself may have been placed there by someone who wanted to keep her away from Gwyn's court. Crossbreed Priscilla's nature. half dragon, half something else, the child of a dragon and presumably a divine figure whose identity the lore leaves ambiguous, made her a specific kind of problem. Dragons in the world of Dark Souls are associated with the age before fire, with the everlasting quality that Gwyn's lightning and the Chaos Flame had to overcome. A being that was half dragon, possibly carrying the specific immortality-adjacent qualities of the everlasting dragons, was not something Gwyn's world could easily accommodate. The painted world is a place of exile, beautiful, functional, self-contained, but a prison. Priscilla has been there for longer than anyone currently alive in Lordran can reliably account for. She has kept the world she was placed in peaceful and contained. She tends the infected hollows within it. She maintains the snow and the landscape. She does not know, or does not say, who painted the world she lives in, or who placed her there. She asks you to leave because the world outside the painting is not somewhere she can go anymore, and because whatever sent her here has not given her a way to leave. When you leave without fighting her, she says thank you. 2 words to someone who offered her the rare thing of being treated as something other than an obstacle. Fact 36. Sen's fortress was not built as a challenge for the chosen undead specifically. It was built as the standard proving ground for any undead seeking to reach Anor Londo. Many have attempted it. The traps, the serpent men, the boulders. These are not tailored to you. The undead prophecy that sends the player through Sen's fortress is not unique to the chosen undead. The path from the bell towers to Anor Londo through Sen's fortress is the path that any prophesied undead was expected to follow, and it is designed to kill most of them before they reach the gods. The merchants inside, the crestfallen merchant, who sells weapons and expresses the specific bitterness of someone who has been waiting for the next prophesied hero for a very long time, have been there through multiple cycles of undead attempting and failing. The fortress is full of undead who made it partway through and stopped, their hollowing visible in their frozen states throughout the structure. What you experience as a gauntlet was meant to ensure that only those genuinely capable of serving as the next Lord of Cinder would reach Gwyn. What it produced, over the long decline of the Age of Fire, was a fortress full of people who almost made it, tended by a merchant who has watched the same tragic performance enough times to be philosophical about its inevitable results. Fact 37. The firekeepers, the women who tend the bonfires throughout Lordran, are all altered in ways that connect them to fire. Anastasia of Astora is mute. The fair lady is blind and sick from absorbing blight. The Dark Moon Knightess in Anor Londo is described as hiding a writhing swarm of living humanity beneath her armor. The specific alterations are not explained by the game. They appear in item descriptions, in dialogue, in the observable behavior of these characters. Each firekeeper has given something to sustain the fire she tends, and what she has given has changed her in a specific way that the game presents without fully explaining. This connects to the broader Dark Souls theology of fire requiring sacrifice. Gwyn sacrificed himself to link the first flame. The Witch of Izalith sacrificed herself, accidentally creating chaos. The undead who linked the fire sacrificed themselves. The firekeepers who sustain the smaller bonfires that allow the undead to persist are also sustaining something, and that sustaining has a cost that is written in their bodies. What it means that the Dark Moon Knightess has living humanity writhing inside her armor is something the game suggests and declines to explain. It is there in the description. It does not appear in the gameplay. It exists as a detail that rewards the careful reader and disturbs them without resolution. Lordran, Fact 38. The demons in Lost Izalith, who drop humanity, were likely the original human inhabitants of the city before the Chaos Flame transformed them. The Capra demon and Taurus demon may have been farmers whose cattle were merged into them by the Chaos transformation. Demons in the Dark Souls universe drop humanity, the warm, vital fragments of the Dark Soul that humans carry. This is unusual. Demons are not human in any visible sense. They are enormous, physically transformed, operating on a completely different level than the ordinary mortal beings that the humanity mechanic is associated with. The theoretical explanation, the Chaos Flame that produced the first demons, did so from the materials available in Izalith when it erupted. The people of Izalith, their bodies, their humanity, and their specific physical forms were the raw material the Chaos Flame worked with. The demons that resulted still carry humanity because they were made from humans. The Capra demon's goat-like features, the Taurus demon's bull-like appearance. The theory holds that these forms emerged from the specific combination of farmer and livestock that happened to be together when the Chaos Flame reached them. A farmer with his goats merged by chaos into something new. A herdsman with his cattle transformed into the first horned demon. This is not confirmed by any single definitive text. It is assembled from the logic of what demons drop and the logic of what the Chaos Flame does to what it touches. It is the kind of fact Dark Souls holds in implication rather than statement. Fact 39. Guff. One of Gwyn's 4 knights, the giant Hawkeye archer who brought down flying dragons with a great bow, was blinded by the people of Oolacile when they found him after the chaos and the abyss had disrupted the region. He was still alive as of the DLC. Guff is a giant, the same race as the giant blacksmith in Anor Londo, too large for ordinary human scale, carrying weapons that reflect his enormous size. His great bow is the weapon that could shoot down dragons in flight, the specific instrument of aerial dragon hunting that allowed Gwyn's campaign against the everlasting dragons to address targets that ground-based lightning bolts could not reliably reach. When the events of Oolacile scattered the area and the people who had not yet fully fallen to the abyss found him, they encountered something large and strange that they did not understand, and they poured resin into his helm and sealed his eyes. He was blinded by people acting out of fear and confusion. He could have stopped them. His strength was more than sufficient. His knightly code, the specific ethics of Gwyn's elite warriors, prevented him from harming the innocents who were doing this to him, even as they were doing it. He is in his tower, blind, still functional, still able to throw his great bow's bolts with enough accuracy to hit things he cannot see. When you find him in the DLC, he asks if there are still dragons in the sky. He would like to shoot one more. Fact 40. Time in Lordran is broken. This is not metaphorical. It is a structural feature of the world that the game acknowledges through NPC dialogue. Solaire says it directly. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. The bonfires throughout Lordran allow the undead to interact with each other across time. Players who have died dozens of years apart leave bloodstains that the current player can see, show their final moments, leave messages. The ghosts in New Londo are not simply spiritual presences. They are temporal remnants, people who exist at a different point in time than the one you are currently moving through. The implication is that Lordran does not experience time in the way that ordinary places do. The flames fading and rekindling, repeated over centuries, has produced a world where different eras coexist imperfectly, where a player who invades another player's world is, in some readings, not simply in a different physical space, but in a different temporal version of the same location. What this means for the lore. Many of the characters and events we encounter in Dark Souls are not simply happening now. They are happening in the accumulated now of a place that has been dying and being resurrected repeatedly, whose timeline has bent under the weight of what has been done to it. Fact 41. Firelink Shrine is geographically impossible. It sits at the convergence of areas that should not be adjacent. Undead Burg above, New Londo below, the catacombs to the side, the Valley of Drakes accessible through a nearby passage. In the real world of Lordran, none of these should be as close as they are. The game itself acknowledges this through Solaire's speech about convoluted time. What applies to time in Lordran also applies, apparently, to space. The geography of Lordran is not simply compressed for game design convenience. It is actively non-Euclidean in ways that the lore suggests are a consequence of the flame's long influence on the land. Firelink Shrine is the hub precisely because it sits at the convergence point. Not despite the geographic impossibility, but because of it. A place where the land has warped enough to bring distant things adjacent is the ideal location for a bonfire that anchors the chosen undead's journey. When you walk between bonfires using the Lord Vessel, you are not simply teleporting. You are using the specific warping quality of Lordran's geography, a quality that the land developed under the influence of a divine fire that has been reshaping the world for thousands of years. Fact 42. The Kiln of the First Flame. Where Gwyn waits and where the game ends, was once a grand and significant location. By the time you reach it, it is ash. Everything in it turned to cinders when Gwyn linked the fire. The approach to the kiln shows you what it has become. A destroyed landscape, scorched and grey, populated by the Black Knights who were reduced to their current state in the same catastrophe. The architecture that once defined the kiln is gone. The grandeur that a location of this cosmic significance must once have possessed has been obliterated by the act of sacrifice that Gwyn performed at its center. When you fight Gwyn in the kiln, you are fighting in a ruined throne room of ash. The fire you can see burning in the center of the arena is the remnant of the first flame, still burning after 1,000 years, but diminished to something you can stand near without being consumed. This is what the mightiest king in Lordran's history sacrificed himself to produce, an ember surrounded by the ashes of everything that was there when the sacrifice happened. The specific power of this image is that Gwyn's sacrifice worked. The fire is still there. It just cost everything else. Fact 43. Both endings of Dark Souls are presented without judgment. Linking the Fire is not definitively the good ending. Walking away into the dark is not definitively the bad ending. The game is structured so that both choices carry equivalent emotional weight. Frampt presents linking the Fire as the noble, prophesied act, the fulfillment of everything the chosen undead's journey has been building toward. He is enthusiastic. He is supportive. He calls it the continuation of Gwyn's great legacy. Carthy presents walking away as the true destiny of the chosen undead. The choice to end the artificial prolongation of the Age of Fire and allow the Age of Dark to begin, which is what Carthy describes as humanity's natural state and rightful inheritance. He is calm. He presents it as the more honest choice. What the game does not do, tell you which one of them is right. The Link the Fire ending shows a bonfire blazing in darkness, the chosen undead consumed by the flame. The Dark Lord ending shows the chosen undead standing in darkness, surrounded by other undead who have come to follow them. Both images are ambiguous. Both outcomes are plausible readings of what the world needs. The game's refusal to judge is its most significant structural choice. You are not rewarded for one ending over the other. You are not punished for choosing the dark. You are given the agency to decide what you believe about fire and dark and humanity and sacrifice. And then you are shown the consequence of that belief without commentary. Fact 44. The dark ending of Dark Souls. Walking away from the fire and beginning the Age of Dark is described by Carter as the fulfillment of the furtive pygmy's purpose. Humanity was always meant to have its age. Gwyn prolonged the Age of Fire out of fear, and not because it was right. Carthy's argument, assembled across his dialogue, is specific. The Age of Dark is not a catastrophe. It is what comes after the Age of Fire in the natural order of things. Fire rises, fire fades, dark follows. This is the cycle as it was intended to run. What Gwyn did by linking the first flame was interrupt the cycle out of fear. His fear of humanity, his fear of the dark soul, his fear of losing the power that the Age of Fire gave to the gods. All of this produced the Undead Curse, produced the asylums, produced everything the game depicts as the suffering of the world. If Carthy is telling the truth, Gwyn is the cause of almost everything wrong with the world of Dark Souls. The Undead Curse exists because Gwyn prolonged the Age of Fire beyond its natural span. The suffering of the undead exists because Gwyn's manipulation required humans to be used as fuel. The ruin of Lordran exists because Gwyn's desperation produced the catastrophes that defined his final centuries. If Carthy is manipulating you, if the Age of Dark is not the benign human inheritance he describes but something else, then the choice is different. The game does not confirm either reading. Fact 45. The Dark Moon Covenant. The order of knights who invade and punish players who have committed sins in Lordran is Gwyndolin's personal instrument of vengeance, operated by the last god who stayed in Anor Londo. Gwendolyn maintains the blade of the Dark Moon and deploys its members to hunt sinners. Specifically, players who have killed NPCs, invaded other players as dark wraiths, or committed other actions that accumulate sin in the game's covenant system. The specific theology of this covenant is Gwendolyn's theology. The moon, judgment, the cold, precise balance of punishment applied to those who act without restraint. The Covenant is one of the more unusual in the game because its function is the regulation of player behavior in Lordran. The Dark Moon Knights are the closest thing the game has to law enforcement, and they exist in a world where every other institution has collapsed, operated by the one god who stayed behind to maintain something when everyone else left. Gwendolyn is keeping the city alive with illusions, keeping its memory intact, operating a punishment covenant from the depths of the tomb that houses his father's empty coffin. He is doing everything the gods who left are no longer doing, and he is alone, and he is working. Fact 46. The everlasting dragons were not destroyed in the war with Gwyn. They were diminished, their stone scale stripped, their immortality compromised, but they were not eliminated. Remnants and descendants persist throughout Lordran. The war against the everlasting dragons produced the Age of Fire, and the common understanding is that the dragons were destroyed in that war. The lore is more complicated. The opening cinematic says the dragons were defeated, not destroyed. Even after the war, Gwyn was known to conduct sporting hunts against dragon descendants, hunts that would be unnecessary if the dragons were fully gone. In Lordran during the events of the game, the Hellkite dragon guards the bridge leading to the undead parish. Seath, the Scaleless's experimentation has produced various crystal-form creatures. The Ash Lake contains an everlasting dragon still resting in the water, the last true specimen of the original dragons, immortal in the sense of having survived everything that has happened to Lordran by simply existing at the lowest point of the world and continuing. The everlasting dragon in Ash Lake can be spoken to. It acknowledges you. It does not fight unless provoked. It is the only being in the game who was present during the Age of Ancients, who was there before the first flame, who has watched the entire history of Lordran from the water at the bottom of everything. It does not have much to say. Fact 47. The Gaping Dragon, the waterfall boss in the depths, was once an ordinary dragon. Its transformation into a creature defined entirely by consumption is the result of the specific corruption of becoming obsessed with hunger above all other drives. The Gaping Dragon's appearance is dominated by a massive mouth that has replaced much of its torso. A physical form that expresses what happens when appetite becomes the organizing principle of a being's existence. The item description for the Gaping Dragon suggests that it was a normal dragon who became entirely consumed by greed, whose desire to consume overrode everything else the dragon had been, whose physical form eventually changed to reflect what had become its entire identity. This is one of the stranger transformations in Lordran, because it is not chaos or the abyss or divine interference that produced it. It is simply appetite taken too far. At the Gaping Dragon is what happens when wanting becomes the only thing. The depths, where you fight it, are the literal sewers of Lordran, the lowest and least dignified space in the city, filled with rats and basilisks, and the specific darkness of what a civilization produces when it is functioning normally. The Gaping Dragon rules the sewers. The creature that became defined by appetite rules the place where the city's waste accumulates. Fact 48. The everlasting dragons in the Age of Ancients were not living beings in the conventional sense. They were neither alive nor dead. existing in the Grey Age before the first flame introduced the distinction between life and death. The opening cinematic describes the Age of Ancients as a world before disparity, before heat and cold, before life and death, before light and dark. The everlasting dragons existed in this pre-disparity state. They were not alive in the way that beings in the Age of Fire are alive, because life as a category did not exist yet. They were simply the dominant beings in a world that had not yet differentiated into the categories that the first flame produced. This means the war against the dragons was not simply killing them. It was imposing death on beings that did not have death as a category available to them. Beings for whom the concept of ending was not part of their nature until the stone scales were stripped and the vulnerability that the Age of Fire introduced became applicable to them. Gwyn did not simply kill the dragons. He introduced death to beings that had never been subject to it, and then killed them with the death he had introduced. The specific metaphysical violence of this is one of the details that makes the history of Lordran as disturbing as it is. Fact 49. The Lord Vessel, the artifact you receive from the Guinevere illusion in Enorlondo, was created specifically to be satiated by the souls of 4 lords, allowing access to the kiln. It was not made to be used by the chosen undead. It was made to be used by Gwyn's chosen successor. He just never found one until you. The Lord Vessel is a receptacle for divine power, a container whose design assumes that whatever fills it will be close to Lord-level capability. The souls of Nito, the Witch of Izalith's successor, Seath, and the 4 kings, are enough to satiate it precisely because they are the original Lord souls, or fragments thereof. Gwyn's intent was to find a being capable of linking the first flame, capable of becoming a Lord of Cinder in the way he had been. The Lord Vessel was the test for that capability and the key to the path. The specific tragedy is that the vessel has been waiting for 1,000 years while Lordran declined and the Undead Curse spread and the gods fled, because the being capable of filling it simply had not appeared. When you satiate it, you are doing something that Gwyn designed the entire system to make possible, but that no one had managed to do since Gwyn himself. Fact 50. The 2 primordial serpents, Framt and Carter, cannot both appear in the same playthrough under normal circumstances. If you place the Lord Vessel yourself before defeating the 4 kings, Carter will not appear. The game prevents you from accessing both perspectives at once. The specific mechanic, Framt appears after you receive the Lord Vessel and prompts you to place it by talking to him. Carthy appears in the Abyss after you defeat the 4 kings, but only if you have not yet placed the Lord Vessel. If Framt has already prompted you to place it, Carthy interprets this as you having committed to the fire and will not reveal himself. This is not simply a branching choice. It is a structural restriction on information. You can hear one serpent's version of the truth, or the other's, but not both in the same playthrough, without specific knowledge of the sequence required to access both. Most players see only Framt's version of the story. They follow the instructions of the serpent who greets them at Firelink Shrine. Place the Lord Vessel as instructed, gather the Lord Souls, and fight Gwyn. They never know that a different version of the same history exists at the bottom of the Abyss, told by a different serpent with a different perspective on everything they just did. Fact 51. The geography of Lordran in Dark Souls 2 has been completely changed, replaced by Drangleic, a kingdom built on top of where Lordran was. Thousands of years have passed, empires have risen and fallen, and the land that you walked through in Dark Souls 1 is buried under everything that came after. Dark Souls 2 takes place in the same world, but at a vast temporal remove. The specific emotional effect of this is that Lordran, the place where the chosen undead walked, where Solaire searched for his son, where Siegmeyer found his ending, no longer exists. It is underneath Drangleic. The cities and structures and people have been replaced by different cities and structures and people. And the only connection to the original game is the lore that survived the intervening millennia. This is Dark Souls' specific approach to time as tragedy. Not the tragedy of things ending, which is a conventional narrative structure, but the tragedy of things being buried under other things. Lordran did not simply end. Something was built on top of it, and the something that was built on top of it also ended, and something was built on top of that. By Dark Souls 3, the lands have converged, the architecture of multiple eras existing simultaneously in the same space. The specific convoluted time becoming literal in the geography. At the kiln of the first flame in Dark Souls 3, you can see castles from multiple ages stacked against each other, reality warped by the repeated linking of the flame across centuries. Fact 52. The true ending of the Dark Souls series, if there is one, is suggested in Dark Souls 3's hidden ending, where the Firekeeper puts out the last flame and a tiny light appears in the darkness. It is not triumph. It is simply something continuing after everything else has ended. Dark Souls 3's main endings involve either linking the flame one final time or shattering it, but a third option exists. The unkindled Ashen One can give the Firekeeper the eyes of a Firekeeper and allow her to put out the flame completely. Not link it, not shatter it, but simply let it end. The Firekeeper and the Ashen One walk into the dark together. The final moment of this ending, in the darkness, are far away, a tiny point of light. Not the first flame, something new, something that exists in the dark that the ending has produced. The game does not explain what the light is. It does not need to. After cycles of linking and linking and linking, after the Age of Fire has been sustained far past the point where Gwyn's sacrifice made sense, after everything that the flame has cost the world to sustain, something exists in the dark that does not require the flame to be there. Whether this is hope or simply the universe continuing as it does, without judgment, without ceremony, producing another tiny point of light in the void, because that is what the universe does, is the question that Dark Souls ends on. Fact 53. Velka, Goddess of Sin, one of the most obscure deities in Lordran, was originally the one who defined sin and kept the Book of the Guilty. Gwyndolin took this function from her. She is, by the time of Dark Souls, considered a heretic goddess with heretic followers. Velka's role in Lordran's theological structure should have been to determine sin, record the guilty in her book, and deliver those names to Gwyndolин's Dark Moon blades for punishment. This was her divine domain, the specific definition of transgression, the keeping of accounts, the judgment of what constitutes offence against the gods. Gwyndolin took the punishment function for himself and, in doing so, reduced Velka to something adjacent to irrelevant. What is a god of sin whose domain has been absorbed by the son of the Lord of Sunlight? Her followers, found in Karim, characterized by intelligence rather than faith, operate as partners, absolution merchants, the people you go to when you need your sins cleared in Lordran. Velka's talismans scale with intelligence, not faith. Her miracle, vow of silence, prevents all casting, including Gwyndolin's sorceries. The occult weapons in the game deal heavy damage to gods and their servants specifically. Velka is associated with the occult. The implication assembled from these details. Velka may have been in specific opposition to Gwyn's family. Her power designed to counter theirs. Her exile into heresy, the result of a theological dispute that Gwyn's family won. She appears as a crow in various traditions, the crows of the painted world, the hybrid crow women who drop souvenirs of reprisal for Gwyndolин's covenant, are Velka's followers. Gwendolyn has his dark moon blades hunting them while using the reprisal system that was Velka's original function. The specific dynamics of this arrangement reward careful reading and produce a picture of gods whose relationships to each other are considerably more complicated than Lordran's official theology presents. Fact 54. The Estus Flask, your primary healing item throughout Dark Souls, is made from Firekeeper souls, which are in turn composed of concentrated humanity. When you upgrade your Estus Flask, you are consuming a Firekeeper's soul to strengthen a vessel that heals you with human essence. The item description of the Estus Flask references its connection to Firekeepers directly. It is a vessel from the Keeper's soul. Firekeeper souls, when examined, are described as being composed of an infinite quantity of humanity, the warm, vital essence that humans carry as fragments of the Dark Soul. This means the healing you receive from Estus is not fire-derived in any simple sense. It is derived from humanity, from the specific substance that the bonfires consume when you kindle them, from the material that the chosen undead gathers throughout Lordran as a resource, from the fragments of the dark soul that the furtive pygmy distributed to his descendants. You are healing yourself with concentrated human essence. The bonfires are sustained by the same material. The Firekeepers who maintain the bonfires are living repositories of humanity. When you offer a Firekeeper soul to a Firekeeper to upgrade your flask, you are giving her the concentrated humanity of one of her sisters to strengthen the vessel that carries her own kind's essence. The law of healing in Dark Souls is, on close examination, considerably darker than the amber glow of the flask suggests. Fact 55. Kindling a bonfire, increasing the number of Estus charges it provides, was originally a sacred rite reserved for clerics. The fact that the undead can do it is treated as strange by the item description. The rite of kindling item description notes that kindling was a sacred rite passed down among clerics, that the specific action of offering humanity to a bonfire to strengthen it was a religious practice, are not simply a mechanical function. It then notes, as an observation rather than a celebration, that it is peculiar how humans had found little use for humanity until they turned undead. This is one of the game's more pointed observations about its own mechanics. The undead's ability to kindle bonfires to offer their humanity to the fire and receive healing in return is not simply a game feature. It is a specific theological act that the game's lore treats as unusual, even slightly wrong, that this particular rite has become something the undead can perform casually at any fire they find. The implication: the undead relationship to fire and humanity is not the relationship that clerics had when kindling was a sacred rite. The undead use fire because they need it to survive the world. The clerics used it as a devotional practice. What began as religion has become, in the age of the Undead Curse, simple survival mechanics. Fact 56. If you kill Gwyndolin without first dispelling his illusion of Guinevere, both the illusion of Guinevere and the false sunlight in Anor Londo continue to persist after his death. The illusions outlast the illusionist. This is one of the game's stranger technical details and one of its more resonant lore moments. Gwyndolyn's illusion of Guinevere, the enormous radiant princess who gives you the Lord Vessel, and the warm golden sunlight that fills Anor Londo are maintained by his power. When you destroy the Guinevere illusion first, the sunlight goes dark and Gwyndolin's presence is revealed. When you kill Gwyndolin first without destroying Guinevere, the illusions continue. The game's explanation for why this is possible is not given. What it suggests, in lore terms, is that the illusions have taken on a kind of independent momentum, that Gwyndolin built something robust enough to persist beyond his own ability to maintain it, or that the illusions are anchored to Anor Londo itself, rather than to his continuous will. Anor Londo in this reading maintains its own false warmth. The last god who stayed to keep the lights on is gone, and the lights are still on because the illusion of a functioning city has become the city's actual nature. The fiction has replaced the reality so completely that removing the source of the fiction does not end it. Fact 57. The fair lady's name is never given in the game. Not in her dialogue, not in her item descriptions, not anywhere in the game's text, and she is referred to as the Fair Lady, as Quelaag's sister, as the daughter of Chaos. She has no name even in the game's files. This is a deliberate choice that reflects her situation. She is defined entirely by her relationships and her condition, rather than by an individual identity. She is Quelaag's sister. She is the daughter of the Witch of Izalith. She is the Fair Lady of the Chaos Servant Covenant. She is the one who absorbed the blight until she went blind. In a game full of named characters with specific histories and specific relationships to the world, the absence of a name for this particular character is conspicuous. She has dialogue. She has a function. She has a storyline that involves genuine sacrifice and genuine devotion, and a relationship with her sister that is among the most affecting in the game. She does all of this without a name. What remains when a being has no name? What she does. She absorbs suffering so others do not have to. She waits for her sister to return. She confuses you for Quelaag because she cannot see, and because you are the only person who has come to her carrying something that smells like her sister. She is defined entirely by love and by loss, and by the specific darkness of not being able to tell the difference between the two. Fact 58. Ornstein's presence in Anor Londo at the time of Dark Souls is, according to one lore reading, an illusion. The real Ornstein left to follow the nameless king, his original master, long before you arrived. Ornstein was the personal student of Gwyn's firstborn, the god of war whose name was erased from history. The fighting style, the lightning affinity, the specific quality of the dragon slayer. These were things Ornstein learned from the one who was erased. When the firstborn's name was struck from the records, Ornstein continued to serve under Gwyn's banner, but his ultimate loyalty was to a master who no longer officially existed. The lore reading that the Ornstein you fight is an illusion maintained by Gwyndolin, like the Guinevere illusion, would explain why his soul description says he left Anor Londo to follow a pale dragon. The real Ornstein departed. What Smaug has been guarding is a version of Anor Londo that Gwyndolin constructed to appear functional. An illusory princess, an illusory sunlight, and possibly an illusory dragon slayer, accompanying the very real executioner who stayed. Whether this reading is correct is genuinely debated in the Dark Souls community. The game provides enough evidence for both the literal and the illusory interpretations. What is certain, Smaug was there. What is certain, Anor Londo is largely maintained by illusion. What is certain, Ornstein's soul description points toward a departure. The specific nature of the boss fight you experience is, appropriately for Dark Souls, left ambiguous. Fact 59. The occult upgrade path for weapons, which the game frames as dangerous and heterodox, was originally created by those who sought to destroy the gods. Occult weapons deal heavily amplified damage to gods and their servants specifically. The occult is described in Dark Souls as an ancient force that is the bane of gods, something that predates the age of Fire's theology, that exists outside the divine framework that Gwyn established, and that was suppressed and hidden because of its specific capacity to harm what Gwyn's civilization is built around. Havel's fascination with the occult, one of the possible explanations for why Gwyn imprisoned him, points toward a being who understood that the divine authority of Lordran was not impregnable, that something existed that could challenge it. The occult shield found in the catacombs near Gwyn's Black Knights suggests that someone was hiding occult weaponry, specifically near the Guardians of the First Flame, the specific enemies that take extra damage from occult weapons: Ornstein, Gwyndolin, Gwyn himself, the Silver Knights of Anor Londo, the family of Gwyn and their servants. Whoever created the occult upgrade path was not trying to fight demons or hollows. They were trying to fight gods. Fact 60. The Undead Curse, the dark sign that marks humans and prevents them from dying permanently, is not a natural phenomenon. It is something that was deliberately produced, or at minimum deliberately used, by Gwyn's civilization to sustain the Age of Fire. The undead's inability to die means they continue to exist long after their humanity has faded, wandering Lordran in a hollow state, providing a continuing source of whatever function Gwyn's system needed them to perform. The bonfires consume humanity when kindled, the humanity that the undead provide by existing and by dying repeatedly. The fires are sustained by what the undead lose with each death. Carthy's argument that the dark sign is Gwyn's instrument of control, that the undead curse is not a natural consequence of the Age of Fire fading, but a design system for extracting humanity from humanity, is the most disturbing interpretation of the game's central mechanic. If he is right, every time you die and respawn at a bonfire, you are doing exactly what you were designed to do, sustaining the fire with your losses. This is the specific horror that Dark Souls encodes in its gameplay loop. You die, you lose something, you try again. The game is built around this. The lore suggests that Lordran is built around it too. Fact 61. The giant crow that carries you from the Undead Asylum to Firelink Shrine, and back if you return to the asylum, is worshipped by some interpretations as a servant of Velka, whose divine form is associated with crows. The giant crow appears at the beginning of the game, collects you from the asylum where you have been imprisoned, and deposits you at Firelink Shrine. It asks for nothing. It attacks nothing. It simply conveys you from one place to another at the beginning of what will become an enormous journey. Velka's association with crows, the painted world's crow women being her followers, the traditional depictions of her taking crow form, connects the giant crow to the heretic goddess who exists in opposition to Gwyn's theological order. If the crow is Velka's, or is Velka in some form, then the chosen undead's delivery to Lordran is not a random act of prophecy, but a specific act of divine intervention by a goddess who has reason to want someone in Lordran who can challenge the gods. This is not confirmed. The crow's origin is never addressed in the game's dialogue. What is observable? The crow is enormous, gentle, and specifically interested in you at the start and end of your journey to the asylum. In a world where everything else is trying to kill you, its specific gentleness stands out. Fact 62. The Darkmoon Knightess, the Firekeeper in Anor Londo, is described as hiding a hideous form beneath her golden armor. Gwyndolin gave her the armor specifically to conceal what she looks like. Gwyndolin gifted the Darkmoon Knightess her golden armor set to maintain the appearance of divinity in Anor Londo. He gave her his special talisman. He made her the firekeeper of the city's bonfire. He gave her everything needed to function as a representative of the gods in a city that the gods had abandoned. The armor hides something. The item description says it was given to conceal her hideous form. What form the knightess has that required concealment? Whether she was already transformed before entering Gwyndolin's service, or whether maintaining the Anor Londo bonfire produced the transformation, or whether the living humanity that her soul description implies is inside her armor is the thing being concealed, is not explained. She is the most visible presence in Anor Londo for most of the game's duration, standing by the first bonfire, her golden armor glowing with divine warmth. Under the armor, something the game considers hideous. This is the specific kind of detail that Dark Souls offers without resolving. The image and the reality in permanent and productive tension. The beautiful surface maintained over something that cannot be shown. Omniscience Fact 63, Karim. The kingdom that produced Lautrec, Oswald the Pardoner, and some of the game's most distinctive weaponry, is described as a dark place whose most distinctive export involves items made from human remains. The purging stones that cure petrification are from Karim and described as containing the remains of humans. Karim's culture is characterized in Dark Souls by a specific aestheticism around sin, guilt, and the divine. The Pardoners of Velka operate from Karim. The distinctive parrying daggers and shotel swords are Karim designs. The crossbows specialized for sniping are Karim trained. The ring that prevents status effects but is rumored to be made through dreadful means is from Karim. The purging stones contain human remains. This is in the item description, without commentary, and as though it is a known fact about a known cultural practice. Karim produces items that cure the effects of deep undead corruption, and those items are made from people. Whether this is a religious practice, the grinding of the guilty into the stones that absolve others, or a purely practical approach to material sourcing is not specified. What Karim's presence in the game establishes, a human kingdom that has developed an entire aesthetic and cultural framework around sin, guilt, punishment and redemption, all of which involves some relationship to human remains that the game treats as characteristic rather than exceptional. Fact 64. Laurentius of the Great Swamp, the pyromancer you rescue from a barrel in the depths, will go to the Blighttown swamp to seek Quelaag. If he discovers you have a chaos pyromancy, he will then go hollow when he finds her. The game never explains why. Laurentius is cheerful, enthusiastic, and genuinely grateful. He teaches you pyromancy, upgrades your flame, expresses consistent warmth toward the chosen undead across multiple encounters. His questline is one of the more pleasant NPC experiences in the early game. If you show him a chaos pyromancy, one of the spells learnable from Quelaag of Izalith, he becomes agitated and obsessed. He says he must find the source of this power. He goes to the swamp. When you find him afterward, he is hollow. The game provides no explanation for what happened. You find him, recognize what he has become, and that is the end of it. Quelaag does not mention him. The swamp does not provide evidence of what occurred between his arrival and his hollowing. Whether he found Quelaag and was destroyed by what he learned, whether the swamp itself took him before he could reach her, whether the chaos pyromancy he was seeking proved to be more than his mind could process, the game declines to say. Dark Souls ends many of its NPC questlines with this specific form of ambiguity. A hollow person in a place that implies a story, and no text to fill in what happened. Laurentius is the clearest example of a character whose ending the game deliberately withholds, not for mystery, but for the specific discomfort of finding someone you liked in the condition they were afraid of ending in. Fact 65. The crestfallen warrior at Fireling Shrine represents the specific psychological endpoint of a chosen undead who understood everything and could not act on it. He knows the prophecy and he knows the path. He has been sitting at the bonfire long enough to become the warning of what you might become. The crestfallen warrior is the first character you properly meet in Lordran. He tells you the situation with the flat affect of someone who has assessed it too many times to find it interesting. He knows about the bells. He knows about the path forward. He expresses no enthusiasm for any of it, and specifically suggests that you might as well sit down with him. He is not lying about the world. He is not deceiving you. He is giving you accurate information with the specific tone of someone who has been sitting on it long enough for accurate information to become meaningless. When you progress through the game, he loses what remains of his will and eventually goes hollow. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the specific gradual way that the game's lore describes hollowing, the slow loss of purpose and will that produces the vacant, aggressive state you find him in if you return to Firelink Shrine late in the game. He was never going to make it. He knew too much and cared too little. The chosen undead succeeds not because they know more than the crestfallen warrior. They knew far less at the beginning, but because they kept moving. The specific quality that links the fire or walks into the dark is not wisdom. It is persistence in the specific face of a world that keeps suggesting you should stop. Fact 66. Ornstein waited in Anor Londo's cathedral for centuries for the chosen undead to arrive. According to his item description in Dark Souls 3, he eventually grew tired of waiting and left to search for the Nameless King, his original master, long before you arrived. His armor set is found in Dark Souls 3 at Archdragon Peak, beside the Nameless King boss. Not on a body, not in a chest, simply there, on the ground, at the location where the god that Ornstein devoted his life to lives among the dragons he chose over his family. Ornstein searched for the erased god across the ages and apparently found him. Whether Ornstein died at Archdragon Peak or left his armor there as a sign of having finally completed his true service, or continues to exist somewhere in the mountains, is not established, and what Smau's item description confirms, that he was the only guardian remaining in the cathedral, implies Ornstein was already gone before you reached Anor Londo. If so, the Ornstein you fought is either an illusion, or a construct animated by his soul, or a timeline variation that the game's convoluted time allows. The fact that you receive a genuine soul from him, not the nothing you receive from Guinevere, complicates the illusion reading. The lore holds the question open. What is certain? The real Ornstein eventually found what he came for. He is with the god whose name was erased. He went looking for someone who should not exist and found him. Fact 67. When Ornstein is defeated first in the boss fight, his hand moves as Smaug raises his hammer to crush him. He was alive when Smaug killed him. Smaug laughs immediately after. The animation is easy to miss. A small gesture in the middle of the transition into Smaug's empowered second phase. But it is there. Ornstein's hand moves. He is not dead when Smaug brings the hammer down, and Smaug laughs. The relationship between Ornstein and Smaug is characterized throughout the game as professional rather than friendly. Two guardians assigned to the same post, temperamentally mismatched, performing the same function for centuries without any evidence that they genuinely liked each other. Smaug was rejected from the knighthood that Ornstein represented. He spent those centuries watching someone wearing the title he was denied. Whether Smaug's laugh is satisfaction at finally being able to crush the knight who had the rank he wanted, or whether it is simply the reflexive cruelty of a man who has always found violence entertaining, is not answered. The hand moves, the hammer falls, the laugh happens. The game shows you all three and gives you no commentary. Fact 68. Smaug was eventually eaten by Aldrich, devourer of gods, in Dark Souls 3, armor and all. The executioner who spent his career eating those he executed was himself consumed. His grotesque armor set is found on Aldrich's corpse after defeating him. Aldrich is one of the Lords of Cinder in Dark Souls 3, a being who became a saint not through fire or sacrifice, but through consumption. who ate so many beings that he began to dream their dreams and incorporate their desires into his own expanding mass. He reached Anor Londo and found Smaug there, last of the god's guardians, a sole protector of a cathedral that had been maintained by illusion for ages. He ate him. The specific poetic weight of this, Smaug, who ground the bones of those he executed and consumed them, who was denied knighthood partly because of this practice, spent centuries at his post, and was eventually eaten by something larger. The armor that Miyazaki designed with deliberate grotesqueness, that does not look like something a sane person would create, survived intact within whatever Aldrich became, recoverable by the Ashen One after ending him. The executioner's final act was to be executed. His armor is the proof. Fact 69. Guinevere, Princess of Sunlight, the enormous radiant figure who gives you the Lord Vessel, actually left Anor Londo long before the game begins. She married the flame god Flann and departed with the other gods when the first flame began to fade. The woman you meet is entirely Gwyndolin's invention. The real Guinevere is out there somewhere, in Drangleic, possibly, or wherever the gods who fled Anor Londo eventually settled. She married Flann. She had children. She built a life outside of the dying city her father built. The Guinevere who blesses you with the Lord Vessel in the warmth of her illuminated chamber is a crafted image of a daughter who left, built by the brother who stayed, maintained at significant magical cost, designed to give arriving undead something divine to receive the Lord Vessel from. The specific scale of the illusion, Guinevere is enormous, radiant, designed to appear overwhelmingly divine, suggests that Gwendolyn understood the undead who reached Anor Londo needed something convincingly godlike to send them on the next stage of their journey. A small, uncertain god, hiding in his dead father's tomb, was not going to project the authority the system required. So he made his absent sister large and warm and sure, and put her in the chamber behind the hardest boss fight in the game, and let the undead believe. When you attack her and the illusion dissolves and the full sunlight goes dark, you are collapsing an act of devotion. Gwendolyn made the best version of his sister that his power could produce. For undead he would never meet, in service of a father who was already hollow. The illusion was not deception in any simple sense. It was grief given architectural form. Fact 70. Andre of Astora, the blacksmith at the Undead Parish, has a unique character model. He is the only NPC in Dark Souls whose mouth visibly moves when he speaks. This was a deliberate design choice, not a technical oversight. The statues that hold the divine embers Andre can use for weapon reinforcement share his character model. This connects him to something specifically divine in the game's architecture. A blacksmith whose design is associated with the sacred artifacts of the god's crafting tradition. Andre's cheerfulness, his specific warmth toward the chosen undead, his longevity. He appears in Dark Souls 3 as well, still at his anvil, still hammering, in a version of Firelink Shrine that exists at the convergence of multiple eras. All mark him as something distinct from the ordinary NPCs of Lordran. The moving mouth is the most visible sign of this distinction. In a world of static faces, he is the one who speaks with his whole face. What he is, beyond a blacksmith, the lore does not fully explain. What he does is provide the specific service that makes the chosen undead's journey possible. The reinforcement of weapons, the access to divine and occult upgrades, the patient presence of a craftsman who has been at this specific anvil through whatever has happened to the world around him. He is still there in Dark Souls 3, still hammering. Whatever time has done to Lordran, Andre remains at the forge. Fact 71. The Undead Burg, the first major area of Dark Souls, was once a functioning human settlement within Gwyn's kingdom. The hollow warriors that populate it, the merchant who sits in a corner selling wares, and the broken architecture. All of it was an inhabited place before the curse made it what you find. The Undead Burg sits between Firelink Shrine and the Undead Parish Church, and its layout suggests an actual city district, residential areas, commercial spaces, a gate leading to the church on the hill. The hollow enemies who attack you are the people who lived there. The undead merchant who sells you items in his corner is still there, still trading, his mind mostly intact, but his situation reduced to selling crossbow bolts and arrows to whoever passes through. The architecture throughout the burg shows a place that was maintained and functional before the curse spread. Doors were locked for reasons of privacy rather than protection. Paths connected neighborhoods rather than dividing them. What remains is the skeleton of an ordinary place that the Undead Curse has made extraordinary in the specific sense of being comprehensively terrible. Every area in Dark Souls was something else before it became the place you walked through. The Burg was a neighborhood. Blighttown was a community. Sen's Fortress was a test facility. The Painted World was a refuge. The current state of each location is the most recent layer of what happened to it, and the layers underneath are still visible if you look at the architecture carefully enough. Fact 72. The depths, the sewer area beneath Undead Burg, is where Lordran's waste accumulated even in the city's functioning days. The basilisks that now inhabit it, the rats, and the slime molds. All of these are what the lowest and darkest part of the city produced when left alone long enough. The depths contain the gaping dragon's domain and the entrance to Blighttown, and its geography makes literal what it represents. The bottom of the city, where everything the city produced and did not want eventually ended up. The merchant who ended up in a barrel in the depths, Laurentius, was there by accident, not by choice. The depths are not a place people go intentionally. The specific enemies in the depths, particularly the basilisks, whose curse attacks can hollow an undead instantly, reflect what happens to the lowest places when they are left without the cleaning functions of a functioning civilization. Things grow in the dark that would not survive in the light. The depths is what a city's foundation looks like from beneath, and what it looks like is not reassuring. Fact 73. The Dragon Headstone and Dragon Body Stone. Items from the Path of the Dragon Covenant allow the chosen undead to partially transform into an everlasting dragon. A human who masters these stones begins to develop stone scales. The Path of the Dragon Covenant is led by an everlasting dragon in Ash Lake, the last true specimen of the ancient race, still alive in the water at the bottom of Lordran. Joining the Covenant and progressing through it involves emulating the dragons, developing scales, developing the stone exhalation that dragons use in combat. moving toward the specific immortality-adjacent existence that the everlasting dragons embodied before Gwyn's war. This is the covenant that connects most directly to the Dark Souls lore's treatment of dragons as something more than enemies. The everlasting dragons were the dominant beings of the Age of Ancients, not evil, not hostile by nature, simply the beings who existed before the first flame introduced the concept of good and evil. The path of the dragon is the option to pursue what they had. Not the age of fire, not the age of dark, but something older than either. It is one of the least used covenants in the game, tucked away at the literal bottom of the world, requiring you to find the hidden passage to Ash Lake and then walk across the enormous roots to reach the dragon. Almost no one finds it. Almost no one follows the path. The dragon is there regardless. Fact 74, Pinwheel, the notoriously easy boss in the catacombs, stole the power of Nito, the Gravlord, and has been using it to maintain 3 separate identities simultaneously. The 3 faces on his form are 3 separate beings fused into one. Pinwheel's item description and the masks he drops describe a being who has been practicing a forbidden form of magic involving the stolen power of death and who carries 3 faces, 3 people, as the visible sign of what the practice has done to him. Whether the 3 were originally a single family or 3 practitioners of the same art or something else entirely is not confirmed. He is an extremely easy boss for the point in the game where he appears. Placed in a location that new players find difficult to reach, guarding items of specific value, and then presenting almost no challenge when fought. The contrast between the difficulty of finding him and the ease of defeating him is one of Dark Souls' more unusual design choices. What he represents in the lore is the specific kind of transgression that Dark Souls' magic system encodes. Someone who reached for power that was not theirs, who took it from a god, who kept using it until it changed them into something that now wears 3 faces. He is small and strange and easily defeated, which may itself be the point. The theft of divine power did not make him formidable. It made him complicated. Fact 75. The souls you collect throughout Dark Souls, the currency you spend to level up, the resource you lose when you die, are the literal life essence of everything you kill. You are consuming the substance of other beings' existence to make yourself stronger. The lore of souls in Dark Souls is explicit on this point. A soul is the fundamental essence of a living being, the substance that gives it capacity and identity. When you defeat an enemy and absorb their souls, you are taking what they were and incorporating it into yourself. The chosen undead grows stronger not through practice or training, but through the literal consumption of other beings' existence. This is the mechanism that makes the chosen undead capable of facing Gwyn. By the time you reach the kiln, you have consumed thousands of beings' worth of existence. The Lord Vessel can be satiated because you have become something capable of satiating it. A vessel of accumulated souls too large to be an ordinary undead. The specific horror of losing souls on death, watching the number drop to 0, seeing what you had accumulated dissipate, is the horror of having consumed all those beings' worth of existence and then losing it. You did not lose money. You lost the substance of what those beings were. It is sitting where you died, waiting to be reclaimed. if you can reach it before dying again. Fact 76. The chosen undead is not described as being inherently virtuous, heroic, or morally good anywhere in the game. The prophecy that applies to them is about capability, not character. They are chosen because they are able to reach Gwyn, not because they deserve to. Frampt calls the chosen undead the chosen of the undead, who would succeed Gwyn. Carthy calls them the descendant of the pygmy, who would become the Dark Lord. Neither of these descriptions says anything about goodness. Neither says anything about heroism in a moral sense. They describe function and destiny, not virtue. The game allows you to kill every NPC you meet. It allows you to invade other players and take their souls. It allows you to join covenants whose purpose is predatory. The chosen undead who does all of this and then links the fire is the same chosen undead who helps everyone and does the minimum harm possible. The outcome is identical. The prophecy is not about who you are. It is about what you can do. Whether you do it with kindness or cruelty, whether you leave the NPCs alive or hollow them yourself, whether you play the system fairly or exploit it entirely. The fire does not care. The fire takes what you give it regardless. Fact 77. The giant blacksmith in Anor Londo. The enormous craftsman who makes lightning weapons and resides in a side room of the cathedral is there when you arrive and remains when Anor Londo darkens. He is not an illusion. He stayed. When you attack Guinevere and Gwendolyn's illusion collapses, most of the city changes. The full sunlight goes dark, the warmth drains. Enemies that were illusions disappear. The giant blacksmith does not change. He is still at his anvil. He still sells his wares. He still upgrades weapons. He is one of the few genuine presences in Anor Londo. Not a god, not a knight, not an illusion, but a craftsman who arrived at some point and never left. His specific origin, why he is in Anor Londo rather than elsewhere, what he was doing before the gods left, is not explained. He is simply there, undoing the work that needs doing, in a city that has become mostly false around him. In Dark Souls 3, a giant blacksmith still exists at Firelink Shrine. Possibly the same being, possibly a different one. The game does not specify. The specific continuity of the craftsman across the ages, serving whatever chosen undead passes through regardless of what the world is doing around them, is one of the game's quieter gestures toward persistence as its own form of dignity. Fact 78. The Asylum Demon, the first boss of Dark Souls, encountered immediately after escaping your cell, is not unique. The Stray Demon in the Northern Undead Asylum and the Demon Fire Sage in the Demon Ruins use the same model with modifications. All three are variants of the same kind of demon produced by the Chaos Flame. The Asylum Demon is often treated as a surprise. The game's introduction to what a boss fight looks like, the specific shock of encountering something that enormous in the first minutes of play. It is presented as a singular threat. It is not singular. The same basic form appears twice more in the game, in different locations, with different elemental modifications. What this tells you about the Chaos Flame's demonification process: it produces consistent types. The Asylum Demon's specific form, enormous, bat-like, wielding a massive weapon, aggressive and direct, is not an individual monster, but a category of monster, a shape that the Chaos Flame repeatedly produces from the material available to it. The first time you see it, you are learning what this category of threat looks like, and the subsequent encounters, one in the asylum you came from, revisited, one in the ruins of Izalith, are the game telling you that the category continues to exist, that the Chaos Flame's productivity was not exhausted by the first specimen, that the world of Dark Souls contains more of this than you encountered in the first hour. Fact 79. The Undead Curse may have been deliberately designed by the Lords, not as a punishment for humanity, but as a mechanism for keeping humans available as fuel for the first flame. The Undead Curse did not exist the first time the fire was fading. It appeared only after Gwyn linked the first flame and the fire began to fade again. This timing is suspicious. A collaborative curse placed by the Lords, each of whom had specific expertise that maps onto the curse's mechanics, would explain both the timing and the precision of its effects. Seath was obsessed with immortality and understood the bonfires deeply enough to sever connections between them. Nito had dominion over death and possessed the right of kindling. Gwyn feared humanity and had both motive and power to restrict it. The Undead Curse makes humans unable to die permanently, compels them to lose humanity with each death, and requires them to offer humanity to bonfires to maintain their minds, sustaining the fire through their loss. If the curse was engineered, then the entire structure of the game, the bonfires, the Estus flask, the loss of souls on death, the mechanic of humanity, is the operational layer of a system designed by gods to extract value from humans indefinitely. Every death the chosen undead experiences is the system working as intended. The fire is sustained, the cycle continues, the humans never stop. Fact 80. Humanity. The dark sprite that appears as a resource in Dark Souls is described in its item description as something whose true nature is unknown. The game directly acknowledges that even the people of Lordran do not fully understand what humanity is. The item description reads, "This black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, then what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves? This is not lore ambiguity. It is the game explicitly acknowledging an unanswered question within its own world. What is known? Humanity is dark. It comes from the dark soul. It is warm, in contrast to the cold quality of death and the abyss. It is what distinguishes a functional, minded undead from a hollow one. Holding on to humanity keeps the mind intact in a way that losing it does not. It is what the bonfires consume when kindled. It is what Quelaag killed people to collect for her sister, or what remains unknown in universe. The fundamental nature of the thing, whether it is purely spiritual, whether it has physical substance, whether the black sprite you pick up is literally a piece of human soul, or a representation of something more complex. The game does not answer this. It puts the question directly in the item description and leaves it there. Fact 81. The chosen undead, who links the fire in the link the fire ending, burns alive, consciously aware, while the flame uses them as fuel. The ending shows this. They are not simply sacrificed. They continue to exist as the thing that is burning. The link the fire ending shows the chosen undead approaching the bonfire and being consumed by flames, and the implication from the game's lore and from Gwyndolin's description of what linking the fire entails is that Gwyn is still conscious inside the flame. He has been burning, aware, for over 1,000 years. The previous linking maintained the Age of Fire. Gwyn is what makes it burn. If the same is true for the chosen undead who chooses to link the fire, they are not simply sacrificed. They become the living center of the bonfire, burning, aware, sustaining the cycle for the next 1,000 years. The next time a chosen undead arrives at the kiln of the first flame, they will find whoever linked it before them, hollow and burning, fighting with the patterns of the warrior they were before the fire took them. This is what Gwyn reduced himself to through his sacrifice. This is what the link the fire ending offers. The game does not call it a bad ending. The game does not call it a good one. It shows you what it is and closes. Fact 82. The hollow enemies do not attack you because they are evil. They attack you because the last traces of their minds are organized around the final purpose they had before hollowing consumed them. Following whoever was in charge of their location, defending their post, doing the last thing they were ordered to do. Hollowing is the loss of self, the gradual dissolution of mind and memory that happens when an undead dies repeatedly without holding on to the humanity that maintains consciousness. A fully hollowed being is not evil. It is not even fully there. What remains is pattern. The behaviors that were so deeply ingrained that they persist after the person who held them has dissolved. The hollow guards in Undead Burg are still guarding. The hollow undead in New Londo are still wandering the city they lived in. The hollow in the undead asylum are still imprisoned or still imprisoning. They are doing the last thing they had enough mind to commit to, playing out the role they held until the role was all that remained. When you kill them, you are not defeating enemies in any meaningful sense. You are ending the residual performance of people who are no longer there to perform it. Fact 83. Hollowing is reversible. The game presents it as a terminal state, but the item descriptions are specific. Using humanity reverses hollowing. The process can be arrested. What has been lost cannot necessarily be recovered, but what continues to be lost can be stopped. The mechanics of humanity as a resource that maintains the chosen undead's human appearance, that prevents them from becoming the hollow, grey, degraded form that the game uses to show advanced hollowing, implies something important. The chosen undead is in ongoing danger of becoming what the hollow enemies are. Every death without using humanity is a step in the direction of the crestfallen warrior's trajectory. This is not a purely cosmetic mechanic. The law of hollowing suggests that the process is cumulative and directional, that each death takes something, and that using humanity puts something back. But whether what is put back is the same as what was taken is not certain. The mind that has hollowed and been restored is not guaranteed to be the same mind that existed before. The memories that dissolve in the process of dying without humanity may not all return when humanity is used. What keeps the chosen undead from hollowing is not heroism or divine protection. It is humanity, the substance of human essence, held onto, used to maintain the specific quality that distinguishes a person from what they become when they stop being one. Fact 84. The world of Dark Souls has a specific relationship to art and creativity. The bonfires produce music that only the player hears, the soundtrack shifting based on location in ways that no in-world character experiences. The music of Dark Souls is simultaneously the experience of playing, and an element of the world's metaphysics. The bonfires are the most peaceful locations in the game, where the music is gentlest, and where the specific warmth of rest is present, where the game's ambient sound design creates the feeling of safety that is otherwise absent from Lordran. This experience belongs to the player of the game more than to the character in it. What this means for Dark Souls as an artifact: the game acknowledges, through its design rather than its dialogue, that there are two levels of experience operating simultaneously. The experience of the chosen undead moving through Lordran, and the experience of the person playing the game. The music is for the latter. The lore is for the former. The emotional weight of the bonfires comes from the intersection. The character rests, and the player breathes, and the specific quality of that simultaneous experience is what the bonfire soundtrack produces. Dark Souls is a game that knows it is a game, and treats that knowledge as a design principle rather than a limitation. Fact 85. The Way of White. The Covenant, led by Allfather Lloyd, Gwyn's uncle, is the religious organization that hunts the undead and sends them to the asylums. The faith that blesses healing miracles is the same institution that imprisons those who need healing most. Lloyd's followers, the warrior of sunlight adjacent clerics who spread through the land enforcing Gwyn's religious order, are described as hunting the undead, identifying those marked with the dark sign, and delivering them to the asylums where they will wait for the next supposed chosen undead, or simply hollow in the dark. The healing miracles that the Way of White teaches derive their power from faith in Gwyn's divine order, and the organization that produces healers also produces hunters. The institution that tends to the sick in functioning society is the same institution that decides which sick people are sick in the specific way that requires imprisonment rather than treatment. Lloyd's talisman, which blocks Esther's flask use, is sold by NPCs associated with this religious order. The healer who can block healing. The faith-based institution that hunts the faithless. The Way of White, in practice, is the way of the people who decided which humanity was acceptable and which required containment. Fact 86. The ring system in Dark Souls contains more lore than the dialogue. The descriptions of rings, assembled together, reveal more about Lordran's history, its inhabitants, and its relationships than most of the NPCs say directly. The Covenant of Artorias ring tells you about his pact with the creatures of the abyss and his capacity to move through it safely. The Horned ring tells you about Kieran's assassinations on behalf of Gwyn. The ring of the sun's firstborn tells you about the erased god. The cat ring tells you about the cat who gave it, Alvina, who guards Darkroot Garden, whose specific history the ring implies without stating. The Dusk Crown ring tells you about Dusk of Oolacile and her connection to the ancient sorcery her people practiced. This is the architecture of Dark Souls storytelling. The things that happened are recorded in objects, not in dialogue. The people who knew the history are mostly gone. What remains is what they left behind, and what they left behind requires the specific attention of someone who picks up every item and reads every description. Most players do not do this. Most players play the game, not the archive. What they miss is the specific depth of a world that trusts its most attentive readers with its most important information. Fact 87. Dark Souls was directly influenced by the manga series Berserk. Hidetaka Miyazaki has acknowledged this. The specific visual and tonal resonances are visible throughout. Artorias' fighting style echoes Guts'. The Moonlight Greatsword appears in both. The themes of a broken world populated by powerful monsters and scarred survivors are shared. Berserk is the story of Guts, a warrior defined by trauma, and operating in a world of cosmic horror where the divine is malicious and the human is perpetually endangered. Its aesthetic, dark medieval, enormous threatening enemies, corrupted nobility, the specific scale of violence against human bodies, is one of the clearest artistic ancestors of the Dark Souls visual language. The Eclipse arc of Berserk, in which a transformative catastrophe consumes everyone a protagonist trusted, is structurally similar to the way Dark Souls treats its major lore events. Betrayals at critical moments, the specific horror of trust-producing vulnerability, the aftermath that defines everything that comes after. Miyazaki has described Berserk as one of the works that most influenced his design sensibility. What Dark Souls owes to it is not specific plot points, but the understanding that a world can be beautiful and terrible in the same gesture, that suffering and meaning can coexist without one cancelling the other, that the human body moving through darkness is itself a kind of statement about what humans are. Fact 88. The bonfires are not simply save points and respawn locations. Lore-wise, they are fragments of the first flame, remnants of the divine fire that lit the Age of Fire, scattered throughout Lordran, maintained by firekeepers and by the humanity that undead offer them. Each bonfire in Lordran is connected to the larger network of the first flame's residual power. When you kindle a bonfire, when you offer humanity and increase the charges available, you are doing what the clerics did as a sacred rite, feeding the fire with human essence, strengthening its connection to the original divine source. The firekeeper who maintains a bonfire is not simply an NPC who upgrades your flask. She is the living connection between the bonfire and what it draws its power from. Her presence, her altered body, her specific sacrifice is what makes a firekeeper's bonfire stronger than an unkindled one. The bonfire in the Firelink Shrine is stronger because Anastasia is there. When she is killed and her soul is taken, the bonfire dies. This is why killing a firekeeper is treated as such a significant act in the game's mechanics and lore. You are not killing a person who sits by a fire. You are severing the living connection between a fragment of the first flame and what maintains it. Fact 89. Gwyn's fear of humanity, the driving force behind the Undead Curse, the asylums, the entire system you move through in Dark Souls, is not irrational. Humanity multiplies without losing strength. The Dark Soul does not diminish when it is divided. If humans were allowed to accumulate the fragments of the Dark Soul naturally, the Age of Dark would arrive not as a catastrophe, but as the natural next stage. Carthy explains this when he describes humans as immortal beings, born from the dark, whose souls did not lose power despite being endlessly split and multiplied. Every human child is a new carrier of the Dark Soul's fragment. Every generation increases the total amount of Dark Soul present in the world. Given sufficient time, Without intervention, the accumulated dark soul would be enough to produce the Age of Dark naturally. Gwyn saw this. His response was the most efficient available. Prevent the dark soul from accumulating by preventing the humans who carry it from dying properly. The dark sign makes them undead. They die but come back, which prevents the natural passage of their dark soul into whatever would happen if they died normally. They are kept in a loop, unable to accumulate, unable to pass on, unable to become what they would naturally become. The specific cruelty of the Undead Curse is not that it kills humans. It is that it prevents them from completing the process of being alive. They cannot die properly. They cannot age into death. They cannot contribute their dark soul to whatever comes next. They are frozen in a process that was designed to go somewhere, and the freezing is the design. Fact 90. The Dark Souls trilogy is, taken as a whole, a story about the specific consequences of refusing to let things end. The Age of Fire should have ended. Gwyn's sacrifice extended it. Every Lord of Cinder who followed him extended it further. By Dark Souls 3, the accumulated weight of all these extensions has produced a world where reality itself has bent under the strain. Dark Souls 3's geography shows castles from multiple ages stacked against each other at the kiln of the first flame. The convergence of all the times the cycle has repeated, all the worlds that have existed in the same space at different points in the same dying age. The fire has been kept burning so many times that the timeline has collapsed on itself. The game's moral weight, distributed across all three entries, is not the weight of heroes versus villains. It is the weight of a civilization that could not let go. Gwyn could not let go. The Lords of Cinder who followed could not let go. The entire system, the prophecies, the asylums, the Undead Curse, the endless cycle, is the product of the same gesture repeated for so long that it has become the structure of the world. The fire ending of Dark Souls 3, linking the flame one final time, is doing the same thing again, with the specific desperation of beings who know the world will end if they stop, but have been unable to imagine what could exist after it. The dark ending, letting the flame die, is the terrifying alternative. Not knowing what comes after, choosing not knowing over the familiar catastrophe of the known. As a fact 91. The game never confirms whether linking the fire is actually good for the humans who live in Lordran, or whether the Age of Dark would harm them in the specific ways Frampt implies. Both possibilities remain open. Dark Souls trusts you to decide without giving you the information required to decide well. Frampt says the flame sustains the world and its people. Karte says the flame sustains the gods at the expense of humanity, and that the Age of Dark is humanity's natural state. The actual outcome of either choice, what Lordran looks like after either ending, what happens to the NPCs you have met, what the lived experience of the next age is not shown. This is not an oversight. Dark Souls is a game about choices made under conditions of insufficient information, to in a world where every authority figure has an agenda, where every divine instruction comes with undisclosed motivations, where the most honest things anyone tells you are the things said by beings who have no particular reason to tell you the truth. The chosen undead decides without knowing. The player decides without knowing. What the game offers is not the correct answer. but the specific texture of having to choose anyway. The weight of a choice that matters enormously, made with imperfect understanding, in a world that will continue regardless. This is the central experience Dark Souls was designed to produce, not the triumph of having chosen correctly, but the specific quality of choosing at all. Fact 92, Dark Souls 3, reveals that the cycle has repeated so many times that the world can no longer sustain another linking. The Age of Fire has been artificially extended past every reasonable endpoint. What the game calls the end of the Age of Fire is not the first ending. It is simply the one that can no longer be postponed. Every Lord of Cinder who linked the fire across the centuries bought another cycle. Each cycle was shorter than the last. By Dark Souls 3, the Lothric dynasty, the last royal line with any claim to the tradition of linking, has simply refused. Not because they lack power, but because they can see what the game has been building toward. There is nothing left to save. The world of Dark Souls 3 is a world at the end of its ability to continue pretending. The sun is dimming. The fire is barely aflame. The great kingdoms have been replaced by ruins that have been replaced by ruins. When the Ashen One walks through the high wall of Lothric, they are walking through the last version of what the Age of Fire produced. And it produced rubble and hollows, and the faint memory of something that was once grand. The chosen undead in Dark Souls 1 was asked to save the world. The Ashen One in Dark Souls 3 is asked to end it properly. The difference between those two requests is the entire history of what happened between the games. Fact 93, the Soul of Cinder, the final boss of Dark Souls 3, is the accumulated memory of every being who ever linked the first flame. Gwyn is in there. Every Lord of Cinder across all the cycles is in there. When it uses Gwyn's fighting style in its second phase, and it is doing so because Gwyn was the first, and his memory is the deepest. The Soul of Cinder is not a single entity, it is a composite. A being assembled from the specific sacrifice of every person who ever chose to sustain the fire over ending it. Every person who reached the kiln, every person who chose the flame, every person who burned consciously for however long the fire needed them. They are present in this final guardian. When it falls to its knees and the piano version of Gwyn's theme plays, the same theme from the final boss of the original Dark Souls, the White Key theme, the sorrowful melody of something burning out. The game is acknowledging what you are ending. Not simply a boss fight, the accumulated weight of every sacrifice that prolonged the Age of Fire, the specific grief of 1,000 years of people choosing to burn. The fight is the hardest in the trilogy. The music is the saddest in the trilogy. These are not coincidences. Fact 94. The Ringed City DLC of Dark Souls 3 contains the end of everything, the literal furthest point in time that the series has depicted. The Ringed City exists at the literal end of the world, at the convergence of all timelines, where the last pygmy descendants wait in a city built for them by the gods who feared them. The Ringed City was given to the pygmy lords, the descendants of the furtive pygmy, the inheritors of the Dark Soul, by Gwyn, sealed away at the end of the world, where the gods hoped the accumulated Dark Soul would never be able to return. It is a gift that was a prison, a city given in honor that was given to remove When you reach the Ringed City in the DLC, you are at the furthest point from the beginning of the Age of Fire that the series has taken you. The sky above it shows the world literally ending. The sun collapsing, the land fragmenting, everything converging on the same final point that the timeline has been approaching since the first flame was lit. Garl, the final boss of the Ringed City, and therefore the final boss of the Dark Souls trilogy, consumed the dark soul of all the Pygmy Lords to bring it to a painter, not for power, so that a painter could use the accumulated dark soul as pigment, as the specific substance needed to paint a new world. The last act of the Dark Souls trilogy is someone consuming the essence of all of human history so that someone else can make something new from it. And fact 95. The painter in the Ringed City DLC is painting a cold, dark world, deliberately, specifically, choosing dark over fire. When asked what she is painting, she says, "A cold, dark and very gentle place. She is the hope at the end of Dark Souls, and she is painting the absence of what has sustained the world for thousands of years. The painted world tradition in Dark Souls. The idea that a world can exist within a painting, separate from the dying world outside it, reaches its culmination here. The first painted world contained Priscilla. The second, in Dark Souls 3's Ashes of Ariandel DLC, was burning. Maintained by fire, sustained by the same force that had sustained Lordran, dying in the same way. The new painting will be cold, dark, gentle. The painter is choosing deliberately and to make a world that does not depend on the fire that has destroyed everything else. She does not know exactly what she is making. She is making it anyway. The chosen undead's journey in Dark Souls 1 ended with a choice between fire and dark, with no information about what either would produce. The Dark Souls trilogy ends with a painter making something without knowing what it will be, and the description she gives of her work, that it will be cold and dark and very gentle, is the closest thing the series offers to hope. Cold, dark, gentle, not the warmth of fire consuming everything. Something else, something that has not existed yet in the world of Dark Souls, because warmth has always been the warmth of things burning. Ali. Fact 96. Miyazaki has said that Dark Souls was inspired in part by his experience of reading fantasy novels he could not fully understand as a child, filling in the gaps with his own imagination, building a version of the story from context and fragments. The incomplete understanding became the model for the game's storytelling. He has described picking up fantasy novels beyond his reading level and constructing his own version of the narrative from what he could access. Images, partial sentences, the emotional weight of sequences he could not fully pass. The specific experience of meaningful but incomplete, of something that rewards effort without rewarding completion, became the template for Dark Souls' approach to lore. This is why Dark Souls trusts its player with fragments, and this is why the item descriptions are enough to reconstruct a history, but not enough to resolve it entirely. This is why Gwyn's theme uses only white piano keys, and the game does not tell you why. Because the person who made it knows that the things you feel in yourself matter more than the things you are given. The most personal parts of the Dark Souls experience are the parts the game does not provide. The theory you developed about the furtive pygmy, The way you understood Solaire's despair before you found the maggot. The specific sadness you felt when Seath started limping. These are yours. The game made space for them by leaving space. Fact 97. Every player's experience of Dark Souls is different because the game was designed to accommodate a range of engagement levels. You can complete Dark Souls without reading a single item description, without talking to every NPC, without finding every optional area. The game you played is yours. The person who fought through every boss with minimal lore understanding had a valid experience of Dark Souls. The person who read every item description and spent hours in the community discussing what Velka's relationship to Gwendolyn means had a different but equally valid experience. The game supports both simultaneously, without marking one as correct. This is rare. Most games with extensive lore either foreground it in a way that makes ignoring it feel like missing the point, or bury it so thoroughly that finding it feels like a separate activity from playing. Dark Souls does neither. The lore is present throughout the play experience without ever forcing itself on you. Available to those who look, invisible to those who do not need it, changing the meaning of what you already experienced if you find it after the fact. The 100 facts we have covered tonight exist in the game you may have already played. They were there. Whether you found them or not, they shaped the world you moved through. The crestfallen warrior's specific despair was written into his character, whether or not you understood its source. Sif's hesitation was in her animation, whether or not you knew why. Dark Souls is a game that trusts you to find what you need when you need it. Fact 98. The bonfires are described in the game's opening narration as the last flickering embers of a fire that is dying. By the time you reach Firelink Shrine, the Age of Fire is already ending. The entire game takes place in the last moments of something. This is the temporal quality that defines the atmosphere of Dark Souls more than any specific piece of lore. The sense that you have arrived late. The grand things happened before you got here. The magnificent kingdoms are ruins. The gods have left. The heroes who came before you are hollow or dead. You are moving through the aftermath of a civilization at its fullest expression, looking at what remains. The beauty of Dark Souls architecture, the scale of Anor Londo, the grandeur of Sen's fortress, the deep history visible in the catacombs, is the beauty of something that was magnificent, not something that is magnificent. The game is a museum of the Age of Fire, and you are moving through it while it burns. What you feel when you stand in a bonfire's light after a difficult fight, the specific quality of rest in a world that does not want you to rest, is the feeling of finding warmth in the last moments of the fire. It is not triumphant warmth, it is the warmth of embers. Fact 99. Dark Souls is a game about a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being the only one who continues. Everyone else goes hollow, or leaves, or was already gone. The chosen undead persist through the specific quality of not having stopped yet. Not heroism in any traditional sense, but a refusal to give up that the game refuses to celebrate or condemn. The NPCs who surround you throughout Lordran either hollow, die, or disappear. Solaire either goes mad or finds the sun. Siegmeyer either finds his death or loses his mind. The crestfallen warrior goes hollow at his bonfire. Oscar dies giving you the flask. The only relationship that lasts the entire game is the one between you and the structure of Lordran itself. The bonfires, the paths, the architecture that was there before you and will be there after. This loneliness is not presented as tragedy in any simple sense. It is the condition of being the one who does not stop. The people who stopped have their own kind of peace, the crestfallen warrior, fully hollow, no longer suffering the specific pain of knowing what he knows and being unable to act on it. The chosen undead continues to suffer that pain because they have not stopped. Whether continuing is better than stopping is a question the game poses to everyone who plays it. The answer you give, whether you put the controller down or press on through the next death and the next, is yours alone. The game does not judge either response. Fact: 100. Dark Souls ends without resolution. Both endings leave the world in an indeterminate state. The fire goes out eventually regardless of what you choose. The Age of Dark begins or is postponed. The cycle continues or the cycle ends. Nothing is settled in the way that endings usually settle things. This is the most unusual choice the game makes, and the one that matters most. Dark Souls is a game that takes the experience of playing very seriously. The experience of dying and continuing, of making choices without sufficient information, of moving through a world that is dying and finding things worth caring about in it. And it does not reward that experience with resolution. It rewards it with the specific quality of having done it, the knowledge that you made it through, that you chose something, that you stood in the last light of the Age of Fire and decided what to do. The ending is not a conclusion. It is a moment. The chosen undead at the bonfire, or walking into the dark, or standing at the threshold of whatever comes next. The game respects you too much to tell you what happens after. It trusts that the experience of having been there is the point. 100 fact, one world, one fire burning down. This has been 100 unusual Dark Souls facts to fall asleep to. Told slowly, for the nights when sleep is close and the dark is warm. The bonfire fades. The ash remains.